We are live. All right. Everything is set up good here. So it looks like we're on. Good evening, everybody. Hope everyone is well. I have a bit of a cold, so you may hear me coughing from time to time. And my only problem is whenever I get the slightest congestion, it immediately turns into a sinus infection, and I'm feeling that pain right there. Oh. Anyhow, either way. I hope everyone's having a good weekend. The weather is beautiful. The leaves are changing, and Quebec is now the first week into a quasi-lockdown where Montrealers, people in red zones, what they've designated as red zones, are not allowed doing certain things, having people into their homes. The restaurants are takeout only again. It is. We're living through the times, and I was talking with someone in the park today, just saying, I hope in some time we realize that certain fundamental freedoms have to be respected, even in times of emergency, setting aside the degree of that emergency that you qualify it as. Okay, so tonight, it's going to be another good one tonight. There have been some recent developments in lawsuits. Stickman's lawsuit, Stickman's lawsuit has been stayed in Pennsylvania. Whitmer's orders have been declared unconstitutional, and the Attorney General says will not be enforced. What else? Legal Eagle's tax breakdown of Trump. Yeah, if you haven't seen it, give it a watch. It's 33 minutes. I watched it at 1.5 to 1.75, so it goes by faster. It is... those who don't watch the news are uninformed, and those who do watch the news are misinformed. Okay, but you know what? There's super chats already in the house. Oh, yes, so hold on. Speaking of super chats, same rules as always. I do my best to get to all of them. Thank you very much for the support. If I miss it, if you're going to get angry, don't do it, and it'll make me feel better and not feel guilty afterwards. But thank you in advance for all the support. We're at 2,000 some odd people. This is crazy. This is amazing. I never thought we'd actually get to thousands and thousands of people watching the live streams, which is fantastic. And I'm glad it's become like the Sunday night ritual of so many people. Terry Ebert Mendoza says, just want to show my support for you, Viva. Thank you, as always. If you can, how do you feel about my Sharona and my president? I have been a little down over the weekend, specifically because of this. And the news is one thing. The news is overwhelming. The news is 24/7 in your face, especially when what you do is legal breakdowns of the news. You're sort of always immersed by it. I don't check my emails in the middle of the night, but I get emails, in 3 different accounts. I get DMs in Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Subscribe, Patreon. It's overwhelming. Where was I going with this? Yes, but when that news broke and I woke up, I heard it the night before I went to bed, and it was like an energy, like winter is coming type thing, where I could just feel the negative energy on Twitter. People, some overtly rejoicing, others discreetly rejoicing, others showing sympathy, which may or may not be sincere, others showing sympathy maybe potentially for social media credit. But it was like I could feel the dark force of too many people relishing in the news. Too many people saying karma, as if to say, like, okay, somehow Trump deserved it, and it's karma getting back at Trump. As if to say there isn't karma in suggesting that when bad things happen to people, that's karma. I mean, that itself generates its own paradoxical or vicious circle karma. But hey, look, it goes to show you I saw some videos of the event, which is apparently the event where it was contracted. The people were a little too close. I mean, people shouldn't be shaking hands regardless. Even before my Sharona, I was not shaking hands with people. I was doing the elbow bumps. I had my own neuroses before all of this, so I think I was very well prepared to deal with it. But yeah, it's the negative energy that I felt. A lot of people, it's not just Schadenfreude. It was like people reveling in the political points they think they're going to score with this news. That, and nobody caring about how the First Lady's doing. Nobody caring about how Chris Christie's doing. Nobody caring about how Hope Hicks is doing. There's a lot of other people who are going through some stuff too, and it's all politics. And hold on, politics ruins everything. Okay, let's see if I can just smash through as many of these super chats. Joshua Cornelius, good to hear from you again. Nice to see you again. Where is the sign that tells us what we are allowed to do in this chat? And so if anybody doesn't follow, I guess you all follow on YouTube. I occasionally post in the community tab. I should do it more often just because it's fun. But we went on a hike today in an island area within Montreal. The signs up there were a joke, and you walk into this park. It's a park in the middle of a populated island. It's like not the country. It says, and there's what were there? There were 11 logos. 4 that green lights what you could do. 7 what you couldn't do. You couldn't hunt, as if anyone's going to go hunting in there. You couldn't go with snowmobile, three-wheeler. It was just endless. You can't do this. And I was like, this is crazy to think that there's a committee sitting around thinking of what should we put a sign on this, because there's an infinite number of signs you can put up of what you're not allowed to do anywhere on any given occasion. So how do you decide on 7? How do you decide on those 7? Can't pick flowers, can't light fireworks, can't go hunting. You can't, what was the other one? Walk off trip. Anyway, it's micromanaging, and it's just ridiculous, because how do you decide when you can't rely on people's common sense? There are an infinite amount of what you cannot do in any given location at any given time. And this is what our policymakers sit around deciding to do. It's like, put a little logo up there. Viva la Viva, Blue Smoke. Thank you very much. Let's see here. I got Daniel Weimer. I'm a baviver. Bavive. I don't know what that means in French. I don't know if it means anything. Bavive. I don't think it means anything. Blurstar says, can you possibly talk about Armenia and Azerbaijan and possible U.S. involvement in the region? I'll ask Barnes. I mean, it depends what the question is and what the issue is. Let's do this. We got found out that I have had the My Sharona through an antibody test this week. Little Rock. Don't know when I had it because I have not been sick since January. I had to continue trial because I thought I had the flu. Well, that's the other thing is, man, when I imagine a lot of people would test positive for the antibodies, given how many, given the fact that so many need to be tested in order to even know that they have it because they are so borderline asymptomatic. But it's good. I mean, it's good to know that people are healthy. It's just the lockdown measures at this point. I mean, Robert and I have been discussing it for a while, but they're the antidote is going to cause more damage than the illness type thing. Legal Eagle was entertaining until he decided to become all TDS all the time. Now his videos are tiresome, biased, and dull. We're going to talk about his tax video because it raises issues, but it's like it was the perfect mix of innuendo, insult, and inaccurate information. The 3 I's. I like that. So let's see. We got the mystery fan says, I love your takes, even if it takes me a couple of views to get through your material. You're good for the brain, Viva. Thank you very much. It's the world has gone crazy. Like I didn't know that this is where we were going to be when we first went into lockdown in March. I thought I would be on the beach having a drink with Nate Brody in Canada. Borders are still not open. Okay, there's a lot of super chats coming here. Let's see if I can get these. Will there be any discussion of voter fraud in Texas and Michigan as seen in the Project Veritas videos? We're definitely going to touch on it. There's no question. It's there's a lot of stuff going on. Yeah, and I just see Robert coming in now, which is perfect timing. What else was it that I wanted to say for the intro? That's the intro stuff. Thank you. I'm missing a lot of super chats. I'm sorry, guys. It's going to happen. Unleash the Barnes or we riot. Good. Justin, oh my goodness. Wait until you see what Robert's looking like. Good as always. Rory, thank you very much for the support. And nice to the UK. It's getting late there, man. Okay. Let's see if I can get one. If I get one more. Oh, I see it. I see it here. Anyone who dances on the illness of another is a monster. 100%. And now they're going to show, videos of Trump making fun of Hillary when she fell down to say now that somehow he deserves it. It's politics it's the dirtiest business in the world. A little extra to ease about the lack of cufflinks in your store. Well, one day I'm going to get the cufflinks, Little Rock, maybe. Okay, let's do it. I'm bringing them in. We're at 9.5 minutes. So, for everybody who also doesn't know, I convert this into a podcast format, which we put on the podcast platforms. And then I put the highlights the next day, which I hope doesn't drive people crazy, because sometimes I feel like I'm just flooding people's inboxes for the day. But I think the highlights are good to the extent that they can be discreetly separated from the rest of the stream. Let's do this. Let's bring in the bonds. Robert, how you doing?
Good.
Now, before I accuse you of not having plugged in your mic, I checked to see that my computer volume was on. Oh, man. So, Robert, it's another week. I told someone that this is being scripted like an implausible episode in a House of Cards series. Implausible.
I was saying that the script writers for the simulation for the sequel to the 2016 election should be fired, because this latest, the having an October surprise, have the media poll during the October surprise to create look like it's going to be a Biden landslide. That's 2016. It's almost to the day that this is what happened. So it's the Access Hollywood tape dropped, I think, just 2 days later than the COVID Trump announcement came about. So it's like, they got to improve their sequel quality. They're going back to the things that worked the first time in the narration, and they came back for part 2, but it's not quite up to snuff in my view.
Well, it says the recordings, the leaked tapes. This is the tapes of Melania Trump, right?
I'm referring to the Access Hollywood tapes leaking in 2016. Yeah, and then a combination of the Melania tapes plus Trump getting COVID almost at the exact same time frame. The media rushes in to do polling during that time frame because they know that they'll get skewed polls, because a lot of Trump supporters won't answer polls when they're nervous about what's happening with Trump, and create crazy headlines. Biden's going to win by 14 points, and like NBC put out today, all that kind of jazz. But it's I was like, man, it's stunning how much they've stuck to the 2016 script. But if we're in a simulation, the script writing has gone down a bit in quality.
So, yeah, look, I heard of the scandal of the tapes. I think I heard what were the scandalous leaked tapes of Melania Trump. What is... this is not a question of bias. It's actually maybe a question of ignorance. I listened to it. I didn't find anything scandalous about it. I think it's actually not... Her not knowing that she was being recorded makes me even more sympathetic to what she was saying. What was supposed to be the scandalous thing in what she said?
They wanted to misinterpret one of the things she said, that she didn't really care about the kids in relationship to one particular issue. That she didn't care about the kids. She only cared about her public attention, which was not accurate. You listen to all of it, and she's frustrated that she can't get accurate coverage for the good things she's doing, and that they misinterpreted and misrelay everything else. But that was in essence that was the only quote unquote scandal they could find. But I agree. I think most people listening to that did not come across as hostile to Melania Trump because of it.
Well, that's the thing, and that's why I'm trying to assess whether or not I'm living in something of an echo chamber in social media, where the people I follow or the people who follow me have the same views. I heard it before I even knew that it was a scandal. I was like, oh, what is this? I didn't even know that she didn't know that she was being recorded the first time I heard it. Then I read about it. It's like, what that? If anyone hears that before they read the spin or before they read the assessment, they might not have the same opinion of it that they want you to have after MSM covers it. But
okay, and yes, everybody, the red tie is in honor of our great president likely whooping up on the China virus.
Oh, and so
the Trump haters out there.
Let's get to that. Just the one last thought on that, on Trump getting it. You go from sympathetic, even Rachel Maddow had a very nice tweet. It was very nice, unequivocal, and nothing to criticize about it. Next day, everyone's jumping onto which conspiracy theory is it? That he doesn't have it, that he's faking it. What were the other ones? That he's in worse shape than he is, so that he's either faking it or he's sicker than he's letting on. Mutually exclusive theories coming out of the same news outlets. It's madness. The only thing is, if I'm a spin doctor, or not even a spin doctor, if I'm on the Trump camp, my spin of this is we work through the risks. Period. The flip spin to that is anybody who sees the video coming out of the day that Amy Coney Barrett was, they had their party. A lot of people probably too close to each other during that party. Whether or not everybody was tested and thought that they were safe to do that is another issue. But if anyone's seen that video, they will think that that's probably not the best thing to be doing during these times.
I did tell him not to nominate Barrett. Just saying.
All right, let's see what we got here. Before we get into the first subject, best DJF. Guys, why don't you talk about economy? Money is politics. It seems everyone understands about why BLM screams about social services. People don't scream for more production. More production equals more jobs for poor and less violence. Well, I don't know if people are not going to disagree with that. It's people aren't going to disagree with that. But let's on that subject. It'll be a good one. We'll start with the first subject because they're sort of interrelated. Let's start with Pennsylvania and then work into Michigan. Stickman's order was not struck down. It was not overturned. It was stayed pending an appeal, which, from what I've read, can stretch into the next year. Stickman, by the way, is the Pennsylvania federal judge who overturned Governor Wolf's 2 orders, stay at home and business shutdown or gathering caps. Said it was unconstitutional, lacked rhyme or reason, etc. Great judgment. Did a couple of videos on it. The other day, and one other thing is the governor asked Stickman to stay his own decision, which Stickman wrote a nice decision saying, no, I'm not, and here's why. How does the Court of Appeal, long story short, stayed Stickman's decision in a 2-pager, 1 paragraph, just granting the order? Robert, I mean, explain to someone like me who doesn't understand it, why wasn't it a motivated decision? And how do we know what the thought process was or whatever precedent they used to overturn or I guess, overrule Stickman's own ruling of his own judgment?
The 2 things on that, I mean, the governor presented a good argument on the stay, highlighting the conflicts amongst the courts, that other courts had come to different contrary conclusions to Stickman, including within Pennsylvania, including other federal courts and the state Supreme Court. And then they could cite to other federal court decisions, like the Seventh Circuit decision that Barrett was a part of, and others that had ruled the opposite direction. Particularly, and as we noted, Jacobson was the entire predicate of their argument for the most part, taking issues with Stickman's saying that precedent doesn't apply in the manner they want to project. So there's the legal side of it, which is they have an above average argument for a stay based on the conflict between the courts in making a decision about the question. And I do think the big backdrop here is Barrett's nomination. If you're on the Third Circuit or any federal judge, they pay attention to all those kind of issues in great detail. They see the political tea leaves as likely to favor the lockdowns being held constitutional by enforcing Jacobson across the board. That's my political read, because you had 2 W appointees here, 2 of the 3. The chief judge of the Third Circuit's a W appointee. I'm not a big fan of the Third Circuit. I found them to issue some of the more mediocre decisions over the last 20 years. They haven't got better, frankly. So the whichever side you are on politically, there's not a lot of Third Circuit cases you tend to cite. So I think that's a combination of what it is, that there's a conflict amongst the courts about what to do. Stickman was the bold decision in a different direction than most other courts were going. And the Barrett was just nominated, and she was just part of the Seventh Circuit decision that affirmed lockdown. So they read the tea leaves. They already know there's 4 votes for a lockdown up there, because they assume Roberts is for lockdown based on his 2 church decisions. And that's why combined, they think the political tea leaves go in that direction rather than the other direction. And then to some degree, it's what is shocking was what some of the arguments the governor made. The governor basically argued that there was no harm of any kind to denying people their constitutional liberties, number 1. Number 2, went further, and he claimed the only injury could be physical or medical injury of those who somehow get COVID and suffer consequences from it only because the lockdown policies are not in place. The second thing is the arguing that basically there is no right to a living, no right to make a living. They're pushing that even further. They want the court to affirm that the line of decisions from the late 1800s, early 1900s no longer applies at all. That would be a terrifying precedent to establish. And then third, the degree to which they are promoting Jacobson as a precedent moving forward. I mean, if their logic is upheld, there's a clear exception to the Constitution whenever you just say the words public health or emergency, because they actually play it out. They say there are no rights or liberties. If somebody's health is at risk, we can suspend any right and liberty because we're protecting the liberty of those whose health might be in danger.
That the rationale or the reasoning behind their affirming Jacobson, it's pure 1984 doublespeak. They basically say,
which they managed to cite 1984 in their brief as if it's counters, like the degree of delusional thinking here. You guys are making the 1984 argument, but somehow you're citing it as the contra. That part was terrifying.
For anybody who hasn't seen the video or read the decision, they literally say we have to limit individual liberties to protect individual liberties. I mean, that's the essence of the argument. Now, in theory, we can understand why that's true. You want to lock up a criminal to protect other people's liberty. Yes, they were using it in the context of Jacobson, that when there's a health crisis, sometimes the greatest protection of individual liberties is the usurpation of individual liberties. It is weakness is strength, or what is it? Strength, whatever it was out of 1984. But so there was that issue. But they have the easier arguments. They all obviously, it's a question of life or death. Perceived life or death versus perceived inconvenience of civil liberties. I just say from a judge's perspective, which one is the easier one to go with, especially since certain measures have been, suspended indefinitely, and others are sort of don't put an end to your business; they just severely cripple it. So I can understand they had the easier argument, but how does it happen that they just render the decision one line or no justification?
That frequently happens on stays. So as a whole, stays are rarely granted. So it was intriguing that they, to a certain extent, they granted it, but it means that they have not made up their minds as to what they think, and they didn't want to show their hand and didn't want to pre-commit to any particular position, so they just granted it and did nothing else. It doesn't, and there was no dissent, which was interesting to note. So it's a warning sign that it was my interpretation of Barrett. It's the reason why I said as soon as Barrett was nominated, I was not going to be pursuing any more lockdown litigation until that got resolved, because every judge in America is going to interpret it that way. The people on the right who are pretending she didn't issue the decision she did, that's not how judges are going to read that decision. They're going to see her as a fifth vote for lockdowns, as a fifth vote for Jacobson. And consequently, they're going to be much more assertive and much more aggressive on that side of the line. Stickman was the one willing to be bold and brave. Don't expect that from many other federal judges, unfortunately, unless Barrett reverses herself once a decision goes up to the Supreme Court or doesn't get on the Supreme Court at all.
Yeah, and I just pulled up a super chat here. It was Christopher Schaefer. We went over what currency was, COP, I forget. But don't worry, everybody, we're not millionaires just yet. The PA governor argued because it's suspended that plaintiff would suffer no harm from a stay. If suspended, the state wouldn't suffer harm without it. That's the issue. The stay-at-home orders were suspended, but could be reinstituted at any time. The gathering limitations are limitations; they're not restrictions. It's the easy argument to make. You could sort of anticipate that's where the judge would go. I like the fact that Stickman did not say his own decision, and they raised another good argument, which is the likelihood to prevail would not mean in the mind of the judge who just rendered a decision against them, because that would be tantamount to the judge saying, yeah, they're likely to succeed on appeal on a judgment that I just rendered. So they raised good arguments. The brief was interesting to read, but it was the citation of Jacobson, the interpretation of Jacobson, the implication of Jacobson, and how they say that Jacobson has been woven into the 100 years of jurisprudence developed around civil liberties. It's an interesting interpretation. I mean,
it's been a buried poison pill, and that's the reason why lawyers like me were screaming about Jacobson. It was the most dangerous precedent that it should have been killed off. It was implicitly killed off when they rejected Korematsu explicitly in 2018, because Korematsu was the culmination of the Jacobson line of decisions. I gave a speech at Hillsdale about all of this. They finally uploaded. They had the whole presentation at Hillsdale College. I excerpted my speech part, put it up on my little YouTube channel. But the worry was that Jacobson would unravel all of this. And Jacobson's always been the great danger. It should have been killed a long time ago. It's only been explicitly affirmed in the vaccination context, where they cited those two cases from the 1940s. Otherwise, it's whenever they've made a horrendous ruling, they've stuck it in there. So when they want to call someone alien enemy combatants and suddenly the Constitution is suspended based on that, like they did in 2006, Jacobson shows up. Now, where they're right is they're saying, hey, by the way, there's always been a poison pill where all the courts have always abandoned our Constitution and suspended it in case of emergency. Just activate that poison pill. But it's why citing Jacobson was so critical about Barrett, that that decision is literally the poison pill for constitutional liberties in the United States.
To me, it looks like also, was it Robertson? Robertson's United South Pentecostal Church decision is another one where they're going to say they're all going to go to that. There's no question, even though context was different. The procedure was different. They're all going to go to that, and they're going to cite it, and it's going to. until the substantive issues get to the Supreme Court, that's going to be the tendency, whether people like it or not. Chuck Miller says, how do they bypass the clear logic it was not consistent and deny stay? Or will they granted the stay? But the bottom line, they say, look, you may be wrong, but we're going to stay the judgment because the risks, the potential are just too great. People are going to get sick. People are going to die. That's it. If we do not stay the decision.
The other thing they did, which should not, they're starting to allow this in courts. We saw it a lot with Sullivan and Flynn. They're citing things that are not in the record. They cited like 50 articles purporting to be a scientific medical basis for the stay, when none of that was part of the record. And there's a reason why it wasn't part of the record. It wouldn't hold up under cross-examination. So this habit of including evidence that has not been checked by cross-examination because it's somewhere on the internet is a terrible habit that courts should stop. Now, if I did it, they'd sanction me for it. I mean, that shows you the hypocrisy and duplicity of our federal courts at times. That the government gets away with it, carte blanche. Someone else does it, they get threatened with sanctions with it.
Well,
so
the rule in Canada, I suspect it's the same in the States, is that you can have what is the word? We know it's called connaissance d'office, like not judicial knowledge, but maybe it is judicial knowledge.
Judicial notice, but basically that's limited. Judicial notice can't be of disputed facts. So you can take judicial notice that a decision was entered on a certain date in some place, things like that, or that something exists someplace, but not for the substantive claims made therein. And that's what they did. They cited a bunch of articles for their basis for a motion to stay when they had the opportunity to present that in the record before the judge.
Yeah, and I didn't want to get into it. That's sort of, no, I won't say partisan debate. That's a debate that I'm not qualified to have. But I flash the highlights because people don't necessarily appreciate when they refer to studies being referenced in the decision. People will look into it and come to their own assessments as to what exactly.
Let me give you an example. I tried to cite, I thought things were not in dispute before in a civil rights case, voting rights case, during the lockdown in federal court in Virginia. The judge said, no, you can't do that. Said, you can't reference that unless you're going to introduce into evidence. I was like, hold on a second. It's undisputed that elderly people are more at risk. He's like, nope, I don't have any proof of that. And I was like, things that everybody knew he wouldn't let me introduce unless I had an expert there to put it into the record formally. Whereas these people are citing 40 different studies after they had an opportunity to present all that evidence to the trial court and didn't.
Yeah, it's and people don't appreciate to get an expert opinion and it seems like an evidentiary thing. Like just go get an expert. It's tens of thousands of dollars. It's delays. It's like things that you couldn't do on an expedited hearing. Even if you could do it at tremendous cost, but it's not just like go find me an expert. You have to find an expert, mandate the expert. The expert's got to prepare the report, communicate the report, be cross-examined, recognized as an expert. It's sort of like
one additional component there. What they're saying was wrong. They were citing a bunch of super spreader studies to claim that gathering and associating together spreads the virus. That's not what those super spreader studies actually prove. What they prove, like the Barrett case, is there's individuals who are super spreaders. Not that a big event creates super spreading. In fact, there's no proof of that. It's that what we're discovering about COVID is that there are certain people that spread it at 10 times the ratio or 20 times the ratio as other people. And so it doesn't matter whether they're in a small room or a big room or whatever it is, they're just super spreaders. So the super spreading problem they were claiming comes from assembly actually comes from isolated individuals that is not directly correlated to simply the act of assembly. So but in that they wanted to do that on appeal because they would have lost that evidentiary argument. Notice they did not make it to the judge in the trial court level. They save all this for the Court of Appeals, knowing the Court of Appeals likely just watches cable news and thinks like Chris Wallace. That's your typical W appointee.
It is. Scott Adams was talking about this. If it wasn't yesterday, it was the day before. But the super spreader being an individual, not the event itself, and what makes someone a super spreader, they don't know. And are they bigger? Do they breathe out more dose, so to speak? Life of Brian says V&B. I believe the Supreme Court validating Jacobson lockdowns would be a Plessy type of decision. How do citizens pursue citizen state nullification non-compliance measures when this happens? What is a Plessy type decision? Do you want to explain that, Robert?
Sure. Plessy v. Ferguson, which is what established segregation in America. I mean, you go back and trace the Supreme Court history. The Supreme Court's often behind some of the most horrendous decisions that cause the worst public policy consequences, whether it's denying that Native Americans have land property ownership rights, which they did in the 1820s, establishing a national bank like they did in the 1820s, whether it's Dred Scott, which led to the Civil War, which might have been solved diplomatically, but for the Dred Scott decision of 1851. Plessy v. Ferguson, basically, along with the slaughterhouse cases, denied due process for occupational rights, and most importantly, legitimized and justified segregation. And it led to the civil rights problems we had for the next 60 years. So the worry is that you have something. What happens when it's the Supreme Court or our federal judiciary that's refusing to enforce constitutional liberties? You get you get civil war, or you get the denial of civil rights for 100 years in the South.
Because it's not even like the obvious answer would be, the legislators go legislate the answer, but they're overriding the most fundamental core legislation of the creation of the very country.
Exactly.
Jim Satala says, Barnes, do you even consider the possibility that Barrett's decision on the Court of Appeals could be different from her opinion on the Supreme Court because of the stare decisis and deference to the Supreme Court while she was on the lower court?
Yes, I hope that's the case. I pray that's the case. Realistically, it's not a likely outcome. Two reasons. One, she's written tons on stare decisis, so you can have a pretty good sense of what she considers precedent and what she doesn't. Secondly, whenever she disliked or disagreed with precedent, she usually wrote a concurring opinion when she was on the Seventh Circuit. She did not do so here.
All right. I mean, so that's the update in the Pennsylvania case, and it goes back. Now, this sort of leads into. Let me just see if we want to do this chat right now. What I'm looking forward to is how they are going to spin an overweight, out of shape, 70-plus man surviving this deadly virus. Should be very interesting. Well, jokes aside, Trump is not the one I would be worried about. I think he's built like a tank, and he's got the stamina of a tank also. And I'm not saying this as a fanboy. I'm just saying this because the dude's out there. He's out there 15, 16, 17 hours a day. What's the word I'm looking for? Campaigning. He's not the one I'm worried. I would be worried about Chris Christie. I mean, that's sort of the.
Oh yes,
because he contracted. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I want to say I think Trump was really at risk for those wondering. I don't think he doesn't go to the hospital unless he got very nervous. So I think that it did get into his lungs. They caused the fever, and if he didn't have quick treatment and the effective therapeutics we now have, it might have taken a different path. So I think for a day or two. He was really scared. And he tends to joke a lot when he gets nervous about things. So he was joking apparently on Walter Reed. He told the joke when he made that little video presentation sitting down where he said that and his body language was weak in both the one he did from the White House and the one he initially did from Walter Reed. The one today is clearly he's looking good. But when he made the joke about, well, my wife's just, a little bit younger than me, so that's why it's not as big of a problem. But I think he was truly scared. I don't think it was a conspiracy of either he was faking it or I don't think he was ever deathly ill, but I think he was at serious risk that if he was at a middle stage where it could have turned really bad, and it was enough that he was truly, I think, very nervous for a day or two.
I see. I look at it the different way. I think he probably didn't want to go, and they all say like this is the most quite clearly the most important moment, and if something happens, we can't have not had you where we needed you. King Couture says, Viva Friday, did you just call Trump fat? I did not call anyone fat. He, by his own doctor's assessment, is overweight, slightly overweight, and I don't mean a tank like that. I mean like a sturdy tank. I think like he's got stamina and he's got strength.
Oh yes.
Okay, so this is the perfect segue now from staying Stickman's decision to overturning Whitmer's. Now, okay, so everyone knows in Michigan, Governor Whitmer, what's her first name? Gretchen Whitmer, may have gone a little overboard with some of her executive orders, both in terms of scope and duration. It's complicated because there's two laws in there. There's the Emergency Management Act, and there is the other one, which is the EMPA, which I always forget the acronym for. I took a picture of it. I'll get it while I ramble. So Whitmer has been issuing orders for a while now that were seemingly timeless. It's the Emergency Powers of the Governor Act. So those are the two laws that are at issue. The EMA is the 1995 law. The EMPA, the Emergency Management Powers Act, is from 1945. Whitmer, setting aside the scope of the executive orders that she was issuing, went well beyond the original time frame provided for in the Emergency Management Act, which was 30 days, I believe. It was a fixed time limit. She basically says, I'm going to be issuing executive orders pretty much indefinitely, notwithstanding the terminology of the EMA, which says it has to be limited to 30 days, without going through the legislature, basically the executive now making the laws. The court came down, you'll have to help me on this because I don't know why there's 7 judges on a court of appeal coming out of the Supreme Court of Michigan. They come down and declare that the Emergency Management Act is unconstitutional to the extent that any order goes beyond the time frame in it. And you'll correct me if I'm getting this wrong. And they declare that the Emergency Management Powers Act, split decision 4-3, what was it? Was unconstitutional in that it delegated authority that it could not delegate to the executive. So if anybody doesn't know that there's a principle in law, I forget what it is, delegatum non potus delega. So the person to whom you delegate power.
Yeah, non-delegation doctrine in the States.
Okay, so it's the person to whom you have delegated power cannot then delegate it back to somebody else. So I'm gonna bring up the super chats while you tell me if I got that right or wrong, and then help us understand this decision because it's 107 pages. It's a beast. I read the summary and then I skimmed through it, but I think I got the essence, which is Emergency Management Act unconstitutional to the extent she's doing anything beyond the original 30 days that they could bypass the legislature, and the EMPA had an issue of delegating power away from the legislative branch.
Correct. So the Michigan decision is a lot like the Wisconsin decision. Just took a little longer to get there. I sued Governor Whitmore, as I like to call her, the early on in the case, federal civil rights case, but her people settled and they gave my clients what they wanted. So that case didn't get to go further. But in the context of that, we researched this issue, but the only real clear party that had standing to bring it was the legislature. The political context in Michigan is much like the political context in Wisconsin, where the governor is Democratic in both states, but the legislature is Republican in both states, and the Supreme Court has a 4-3 Republican edge in both states. Not surprisingly, it was a 4-3 split that ultimately determined her decision was unconstitutional in Michigan, just as it did in Wisconsin, but not because of any Bill of Rights issue. It was because we're supposed to have a tripartite division of government. The legislative branch is supposed to legislate, the executive branch execute and enforce the laws, not write the laws, not make the laws. And there's various legislation over time, and some of the laws she was citing were from the 1940s, so they were designed for a wartime era, where they gave the governor executive emergency powers to deal with a situation where basically she couldn't get something done through the legislature in time to address an emergency. That was the anticipation of all of these emergency laws. Some of these emergency laws that governors are citing go from to the early 1900s, and they were either in the context of massive plague outbreaks, plague-like outbreaks, smallpox, yellow fever, that kind of thing, or they were things like wartime or severe rioting. So that's why you see them in the 1900s and teens. Then the next time you see these laws passed, the 1940s. The next time you see these laws passed are the 1960s to early 1970s. They mostly disappear from the books after that, and no governor had used the laws the way all of these governors are. So the legislature brought suit. In Michigan, they have a specialized procedure about where you can bring such a suit. You have to bring it in the Court of Claims of Michigan, where you don't have a jury trial right. The judge ultimately determined in my view, was a crazy interpretation. She said the general statute applied rather than the specific statute applied, and didn't even really fully reach the scope of constitutional questions that the Supreme Court did. But ultimately, it goes up to the Supreme Court, and they agree on certain provisions, both sides. But the ultimate effectiveness on whether the orders were going to be unconstitutional was the part they disagreed on. But their point was a simple one. In America, if you have the executive branch doing the legislature's work, why even have a legislature? Why even have tripartite branches of government? Our administrative state on the federal level has gotten way out of control this way by Congress delegating to executive agencies to write their own laws. It creates a bureaucratic state that is immune from democratic checks. It is a certain kind of deep state. It's the administrative state, bureaucratic state. You put it in the law enforcement, national security context, then you get a deep state. But it's the same concept of a dual state that the Economist editor talked about at the end of 19th century that led to the idea of the deep state in its origin. It was just, how can you have a government that's non-responsive to the public? And it's by creating literally a dual state. One part of the state is democratically elected, one part is not. One part is responsive to democracy, one part is not. And that's what you're seeing on a massive scale. And it's just governors asserting, seeing the power that the administrative state has at the federal level and just embracing it wholesale in the name of an emergency here, and doing things that have never been done in our history before. And because all the judges come from a professional class that's all terrified because they follow institutional media like the New York Times, going along with it. And unfortunately, as we talked about from the very beginning of this, there's a long history of American courts abdicating their judicial supervisory role anytime anybody says the words crisis. So whether it's war, whether it's public health, whether it's riots, whatever it is, all they got to do is say crisis, and the Constitution tends to vanish for at least the length of time of the crisis. The difference here is this crisis was nowhere near as severe as past ones that had legitimated such exercise of power, and were going on much longer than those had, and to a much broader group of people. Like occasionally I'll get someone say, well, they quarantined a whole neighborhood for 6 months during some yellow fever epidemic outbreak. That's true, but we've never quarantined the entire country before, the entire state before. We've never disavowed all of the constitutional protections for pretty much everybody before. This is all new. And luckily, a Republican-appointed Supreme Court, a Republican-elected Supreme Court, was willing and able to step in and say, no, this was not much. This was clearly unconstitutional, because they had the backing of the Republican state legislature that wanted to restrain the governor, and the governor was ignoring their attempts to restrain her.
It's an amazing thing, actually. I just did an interview, or a bit, which is going to air next week on. It's called K.R. Davidson's Canadian Justice. It's a television show, or a news show, where we were discussing the difference between the United States Supreme Court and our own, and the United States system and our own. And it is the balance of power that you have in the states, or what is supposed to be the tripartite system, so that each section keeps the other in check but doesn't override the other, is an amazing concept, which we don't really have in Canada. But when it gets out of balance, it gets out of balance. And you have basically they've gone what, 6 months in Michigan without the legislature doing what it is they're supposed to do. And what's the good reason? Why couldn't they do it at the same time? First of all, that is my question. Why couldn't they do this at the same time? What prevents them from having legislated 5 months ago?
Oh, they tried. She just refuses to sign. So that's the problem. So that because she's usurped their duties, and when they try to take him back, she says, no, I won't sign the legislation, and they don't have veto-proof majorities. So that's effectively what happened. There was always a role for the executive in legislation, but it wasn't supposed to be initiating legislation. It was supposed to be either affirming or rejecting legislation from the legislature. That's what she just said, screw you, I'm not going to do it. Same problem in Pennsylvania. The difference is the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is Democratic, so they allowed him to do it. And it was the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's decisions that the Third Circuit probably relied upon in issuing that stay of Stickman's order.
And so I just lost my thought. When is Whitmer up for re-election?
Not until 2022. And for the most part, because of the way the media's covered these things, governors that have imposed the strictest lockdowns have been politically rewarded in the polls. Because it's, oh, look, they're doing something. They're doing something to protect us. That's been the mindset and the mentality. So one of the few Democratic governors that is up for re-election that has been under lockdown has been Cooper in North Carolina, highly likely to win re-election. So the way the media has portrayed this and people's fear-induced mindset, and this will always happen. I mean, Korematsu was a popular decision at the time. Jacobson was a popular decision at the time. Buck was a popular decision. All the horrendous violations of civil rights and civil liberties were usually popular. The court's job was to protect them when those protecting those rights was not popular. And unfortunately, they have a long, long history of absconding and abandoning those rights protections precisely when people need them the most. As Earl Long once said, this guy came up to him and said, Earl, I always vote for you when you're right, but I can't vote for you when you're wrong. And Earl said, you dumb SOB, I don't need you when I'm right. And there was deep truth to that. I mean, it was Earl's, Northern Louisiana way of putting it. But the truth, the same thing is the court was designed to be most immune from democratic pressures. So it would take the unpopular decision to protect civil liberties. Unfortunately, historically, there's no evidence of that.
It's an amazing thing. I talk with people in the park. I talk with locals. When you get past the initial, everyone sort of feels that they have to project the same sort of uniform understanding and acceptance of the situation. But you get under it and it's like, yeah, what's justifying these draconian measures? What are the numbers? What's the actual threat, and what are the actual consequences to justify these measures? And I'm reading Isaac Castillo's super chat. He says, did anyone catch Stephen Crowder's call for a FOIA request and call for everyone to FOIA Governor Whitmore actual death counts to dispute the funny numbers she used to justify her executive orders? That's the other thing is, you know, in Canada, we're under 10,000 fatalities per capita. It's it's a large number, and it's not to undermine that number. To explain it away, as I've mentioned in tweets and on certain videos, 90% of those deaths originated in or around long-term healthcare facilities. One of the reasons was, by the time you get into lockdown, they were recycling staff among the long-term healthcare facilities. So an infected staff member would go from one house to another talking about super spreaders. So you have these numbers, which, whether or not you think they justify these measures in the first place is one thing, but then you have the actual cause of the problems, which have nothing or very little to do with the draconian, fundamentally unconstitutional measures being implemented. And that's my rant. One question that I had, though, why are there 7 judges on this Michigan court?
Most state Supreme Courts have 7 judges. So the U.S. Supreme Court used to have 7. Then we added it to 9. Most state Supreme Courts have had 7 throughout their history. Some vary. Some will only have 5, but some will have 9. But most state Supreme Courts only have 7. And in most states, the state Supreme Court is an elected position.
Okay, interesting. So Allegan News says the case in Michigan was not brought through the Court of Claims, but was in response to federal court judge asking state to answer questions in case brought by medical providers. The legislature case had yet to be ruled on. Okay, very interesting, because we did a video. I think we did talk about the one that went through the state of claims, and
this decision will apply to the legislature case as well.
So now, unlike in Pennsylvania, this decision was rendered by it's a substantive decision rendered by the Court of Appeal, effective immediately. I think the Attorney General. I have people sending me emails, and I don't know if I should mention them because maybe they don't want to be put on blast. So I thank you for whoever sent me the article. Sent me an article saying the Attorney General has said we're not enforcing any of these measures, regardless of Whitmer saying they're in effect for the next 21 days. You want to? I mean, I sort of understand it. You want to explain what Whitmer is saying when she says, notwithstanding the judgment, everything is in effect, like pounding on the table. You will respect my orders for the next 21 days. What does she mean by that?
That she's literally just going to ignore the order. That she's risking contempt or anything else, and she's going to stick with the order rather than do it. And you notice the time frame, and we're right on the eve of an election. So if Michigan unlocked and opened up, the fear amongst Democrats is that will help Trump because it will drive down unemployment and help him get reelected. So it's not a coincidence she's willing to risk contempt of court just to try to keep Trump from winning Michigan.
This is mind. It was when I started my channel. Peppermint, thank you very much. It was the antithesis of politics. And when I started the law, I never thought it would be not fundamentally, inextricably intertwined with politics. This is so awfully political, and there's no way to ignore it. Like there's no way to ignore it. That I would imagine also, if the order is lifted or declared unconstitutional, people can get back to business. It will make her look like an idiot before the election, and it will potentially have a backlash of people voting just to vote, even though she's not on the ballot, to vote against her in principle and just go for Trump.
Right.
Yeah, I hadn't put that 21 days in context. And the Attorney General, now I'm wondering, I hadn't checked the Attorney General's political affiliation. I do wonder, the Attorney General says we're not going to prosecute for any of these issues. Now I'm wondering, of what political persuasion is the AG?
Probably a Republican. I don't know personally, but it would be, that's usually 70-80% right.
That's amazing. We got Peppermint. Peppermint says, what happened to court TV? And do you think the lack of it is why crooked judges are getting away with so much? That's an interesting observation as well.
There's two different versions out there now. Dan Abrams established Court TV. He has Law and Crime Network instead. And they actually still cover trials. It's just they're available on a wide range of streaming services. I don't think they're on any mainstream media. And then there's a bunch of court subscription services now. So you can watch some really interesting trials, but I think it's expensive. I mean, I subscribe to it because I can watch interesting cross-examinations, direct examinations, opening, closing statements in big civil cases that otherwise don't get much attention. Selective criminal cases. I agree. It's too bad we don't have Stickman in Nevada to Trooper at FN 2525. It's much better than Sissy-Lack, who's continuing to close stuff down here. Golly, I hate that guy. But
in Quebec, we've gotten to numbers which there's a spike when you're going from what is the new goal. At the beginning it was don't overwhelm the hospitals. Now we're no longer anywhere near there, but the goal has moved. So now any spike on the new target justifies code red for Montreal and various regions. It is.
And I forecast this from the very beginning. I told folks what's going to happen is they're going to say that we have to have testing, and then they're going to use the testing results to justify all kinds of other provisions, even when there's no longer any correlation between mortality and hospitalization and the problem. And that's precisely what they did. It was always a scam from the get-go. We never have done mass testing for flu-like viruses, ever. We didn't do it for Spanish flu. We didn't do it for Hong Kong flu. We didn't do it for Asian flu. We didn't do it for either swine flu. We've never done mass testing on this scale. It's still questionable about how reliable that testing is. More and more questions are raised by Alex Berenson and other people about that. But it was always intended to first start off by pointing out when there's a very low numbers of tests, how high the mortality rate is, because you're not testing most people, terrify people into thinking that association is permanent rather than simply a product of low testing. Then when you dramatically increase the testing, pretend that rate is static when it isn't, and just mislead people and scare people and terrify people into obedience. The worrisome thing for me is that as a constitutional civil rights guy, is that the Milgram experiment works. All you gotta do is put on a white lab coat, and all the people that will never listen to a general and never listen to the police and never listen to a politician, turns out they were just wearing the wrong outfit. Don't put on a general's uniform. Don't put on a politician's suit. Don't put on a police uniform. Put on a white lab coat. And just like the Milgram experiment, watch people behave happily.
And it's an amazing thing because it's the exact justification out of Quebec. The positive cases are going up because they're testing. I would say everybody. I think it was like 30,000 tests a day. The numbers are going up, but the hospitalizations and deaths are not going up to the same proportion, but they're going up nonetheless. And that's by and large because the people contracting it now are not as vulnerable as the ones who were contracting it back in March. But just seeing a number, it's the social dilemma. It's the exact same conditioning. It's like when you see pings and you see charts and you see red and you see colors, red light flashing, you end up living in a constant state of terror. So much so that I'm very much self-reflective and aware of it. But I feel it. I feel the urge to wash my hands for no good reason. I haven't seen anybody. I feel the urge to hold my breath when somebody walks across me on the street. I know it's absurd, but it's I have the insight to know that it is absurd. But we were hiking literally today in the woods, in the middle where I saw those signs that said what you can't do. And there was a woman jogging with her dog. She shouted at us before we got to her, 2 meters, 2 meters. She's jogging. We're in the wilderness, and it's not like we're spitting on anybody. It depressed me. It depressed me for two reasons. If it's just my deep thought. One was either that she was so traumatized that she thought this was necessary to shout it out in the middle of open wilderness, sunny day, we're all keeping our distance regardless. That was one side that depressed me. The other side that depressed me was it had nothing to do with the risk. It just had to do with imposing the law on other people and exercising your authority. And she knew the law and she wanted to make sure everyone was following the law, which is just as terrifying. Either one is terrifying.
There's a great South Park episode about the pandemic. Leave it to South Park to mock this effectively. But they have Cartman going around carrying a 6-foot stick saying, "Mom, 6 feet, 6 feet, Mom." So he's just doing this to random people just because of the authority kick he gets out of it.
And I saw someone on the street doing it, literally. Okay, I'm going to blast through these super chats before I forget. 64 Pink 256 says, "Usually I plug my games, but the duo in front of me requires praise and thanks. So my question is to the audience, who can beat the super chat amount?" It is not a competition. And for everybody knows, YouTube takes 30%. If that sickens you, I can understand it. I would understand it. Friend's wife in a nursing home, long-term healthcare facility. In May, they needed to rent refrigerated trucks to store the bodies. You can read the last sentence. I will not make those accusations. I don't want to. One who knows defamation law. That is one's opinion. But there's no question the policy.
And one irony, Cuomo could sue you for defamation, but we can't sue Cuomo for defamation under sovereign immunity. How does that make sense?
No, and who needed anybody to tell them that it was a bad policy at the time. It could be. I don't care. It could be for diarrhea. It's madness, and I don't even understand the rationale to it. Was it to free up hospitals so that you can make more people sick? I mean, it never made sense.
Not only that, it was directly contrary to what CDC said at the time. So the CDC put out advice saying not to do these things to nursing homes. Do not send infected people back in, and it had a bunch of procedural protections in place, protective protocols in place. New York, New Jersey, Michigan all refused to enforce them, refused to follow them deliberately, and so. The conspiracy theorist is going to say they wanted to drive up the death rates. The people that would note, Bill Gates' sort of giddy reaction to this virus and the fact that he believes in death panels, because that's what effectively it did. It accelerated the death. So I'm not saying those conspiracy theories are true. I'm just saying I see why they feel that way, because it's hard to explain the rationale of what these governors were doing.
No, and I know you don't, like we say, we're not conspiracy theorists, conspiracy analysts, but I don't even use the word conspiracy theorist anymore, because it's a derogatory term for someone who might have a legitimate query of an idea. I won't even call Brian Stelter's idea that Trump is faking it or that he's sicker than he is. I won't call them conspiracy theories. He's querying. It's a politically motivated theory, but when you read this, it couldn't make sense. It can't make sense. And when you try to explain inexplicable policy, you're going to look for sort of out of the box explanations, because pure stupidity would not result in that. Okay. Speaking of which, is this a good segue to we talk about Legal Eagle's assessment of Trump's taxes?
The worst video on tax law explanation by a supposed lawyer I have ever witnessed. It was misrepresentation after misrepresentation after misrepresentation. So I went ahead and watched it. I've been avoiding Legal Eagle because his stuff is so political and so that it's like, okay, I don't mind you being political, but it's just not usually very informed. I mean, he's a guy who he comes across as someone who's a brief corporate lawyer, mid-tier corporate lawyer. And now just does this. He's promoted heavily by YouTube because his politics is what they want, and gives off the veneer of sophistication with that obvious green screen background. These are real books, by the way, not like Legal Eagles. And I've read them, probably unlike Legal. So he goes through and almost everything you could get wrong, he cites. So, for example, he says, "Oh, you can't take haircuts and personal deductions or as business deductions unless there was absolutely no personal benefit to that." It's completely false. Completely false. For example, when you take a business meal, when you take business entertainment, there's always a bit personal benefit to the food you're eating and whatever you're drinking at a company party. You still get to take it as a business deduction. The fact that something has a personal benefit, which frankly is inescapable. Travel has a personal benefit. Food has a personal benefit. Hotel rooms, personal benefit. All of those things have personal benefits. Makeup, clothing, you name it. Driving a vehicle that's a company vehicle, there's a personal benefit to that, right? You had to be transported at some level. So the idea that it has to be 100% for business and you can't have any personal benefit at all is not the legal standard. It's whether it's necessary for business, not whether that necessity is not exclusionary for its methodology. He also goes on and says that if you do an easement, a conservation easement that you can take a charitable donation on related to an investment property, then magically that means you can never take that property as investment property. Also completely wrong.
Well,
real estate deals include that.
This is the problem I had with the video. I literally started taking notes and then I just stopped. And I stopped because it was just it's the strategy of arguing with it's the strategy of arguing with I don't want to say disingenuous interlocutor, but one who's trying to conquer through confusion. So let's say the first thing, because Trump got he wrote off, I think 1 year, $70,000 in hairstyle. Setting aside some of the comments in Legal Eagle's video where Trump admitted that he does his own hair, so that's fraud. Setting aside that theory, I can see that being offensive to people. $70,000 for hair in a year. I mean, I can see it being shocking. Now the question is, Legal Eagle starts off with the assumption that it's criminal and there's definitely going to be some IRS sanctions. I presume that if that amount were not justifiable under tax law, he would have had an issue already. I mean, is that oversimplified, or do I just take for granted if he, with his high power accountants, writes that amount off, it's the maximum allowed by law without being questioned?
Well, first of all, it's identified what's in there, folks. So do you think all the tax lawyers and tax accountants put, hair, 70,000 and thought you could never take a deduction for fixing your hair? Why would they write that in there? I mean, that's why his analysis was idiotic at every level. Aside from not knowing you can take those deductions, usually, for example, people in Trump's world, their deductions are bigger for those items because you're talking about a guy who is the marketer. His whole engine is marketing. His brand is his business. His business is his brand. And people usually take bigger deductions. You should see what actors take. See what people on TV news take. I mean, they take 100% of everything. The Trump clearly wasn't taking 100% of everything. He was taking percentages on different things. Some accountant or lawyer had done an analysis, saw what all the expenses were for, saw all the bookkeeping was for, figured out what percentage could be taken for business purposes. So that's where all of us, like if you take a conservation easement, that's your typical investment property or real estate development. You're going to do that. You're going to do that because environmentalists will hijack you and prevent your development from even occurring if you don't agree to that. So it is, you agree as part of your real estate development to dedicate some part of that real estate for conservation easement purposes. In exchange, you get a charitable donation. That is commonly done in all real estate deals. He told people that if you ever do that, you can't take the property as an investment property. Just completely wrong. And then he had a litany. He said consulting fees are illegal.
Okay, let's stop here because we'll get just to add the details so people can understand the point. Apparently, if there was some cross-referencing in the taxes, apparently Ivanka Trump might have been paid as a consultant. Let's just say she was paid. Mm-hmm. Trump paid one of his children or all of his children consulting fees for work they did on projects. To imply that there's impropriety to this is to indicate that someone doesn't understand what income splitting is. And what pretty much now I don't have the luxury of doing it for a number of reasons, one of which is my wife works and gets the salary that it wouldn't make any sense in any event. That's even assuming we would have had the income to split at any point. But so explain. So that's the issue. It's corrupt. He's got, what did he say? His children. He had a word in his video for his children being on the payroll. But that's the issue. So that the children were paid consulting fees for work they did for the enterprise, which he takes issue with.
Yeah, which is just completely moronic. So this first fundamental problem, he called it like it was a gift and maybe a gift tax. That's insane. So typically you pay people by consulting fees in these kinds of real estate projects all the time. So the fact that you're on the payroll of the Trump organization does not mean all work you ever perform now has to be under the payroll tax provisions. Number one. Number two, given the amounts they're being paid, you end up, here's what he seemed to not know. When you're paid independent consulting fees, you're self-employed as an individual, you still pay payroll tax. You just pay it rather than the company paying it. So the idea that somehow payroll taxes disappear when you relabel something self-employment income just shows he has no clue how the tax laws work. Not only that, the big thing he missed is that when you pay someone consulting fees, they pay tax on that. Because when you put that in the return, that means a 1099 is going out to them and they have to pay tax on it. It guarantees the tax has to be paid on it. So all that's shifting is who pays the tax, not whether tax gets paid. In fact, what would have been illicit is if he was giving money to his kids and him paying the tax rather than them because he has bigger tax deductions available to him to where he wouldn't have likely paid any tax on that money. So it was just the opposite. The consulting fees meant likely more tax would have been paid than if no consulting fees had been identified in the tax returns. So it was completely wrong about every aspect of tax law that could possibly apply to the circumstance. And he had no clue. And then there's like two or three other items like that. He gets them all.
Wait, don't get into it because I'm going to get there. I just want to pull this one up. This is a good question. Son of Liberty says, employees are forced to work from home. Can we all take a home office deduction? I suspect the answer is going to be yes.
Now, the problem is not if you're a W-2. So the problem is if you're a W-2 employee, you don't get those deductions. Only self-employed people do. So that's the annoyance, inconvenience. Now, let's say you have a separate business, but then you'd have to prove that it was related to that separate business.
All right. Now, speaking of business expenses, questionable business expenses. I'm joking, Robert. Barnes, do you alternate cigars or you like a specific one? Which one?
I like a bunch of cigars. So any Cuban cigar pretty much is good. If it's the top Class A one, because they do different ones. They do 4 grades of Cuban cigars, and then there's the knockoffs. But if you get the good ones, are good. And then there's a lot of Dominican ones and other ones that are good too. So this one's a Romeo and Juliet special edition White Churchill. So that's what this one is.
Very nice. Now, and speaking of expenses and paying taxes in foreign countries, for example, one of the issues that legal again, innuendo and insults. The one that really bothered me was spend $70,000 for what that is on his head, which is just so freaking tired. It's such tired and boring and cheap comments. But he took issue with the fact that the Trump organization, which is an international organization, was paying monies to certain countries, corrupt regimes. I mean, this was not the exact word he used. It was the exact sentiment that he's paying taxes in Turkey. Now, we've discussed this briefly before, but this is one of the elements where I just said this is innuendo and accusation without any substance.
Oh, completely. Because in those, of course, you're going to pay foreign taxes. And under tax treaties, that's the way it's designed. So we have a bunch of tax treaties with foreign countries where we agree that there will be a tax deduction taken for any taxes they pay that foreign country and vice versa. And it's done for economic development reasons. It's done because we want U.S. investors having control over foreign assets and foreign real estate as much as we can. Same reason the Japanese did it in the 1980s. And so there's a lot of political reasons behind it, but it's entirely normal. Nothing about it is abnormal. And then the next part of his analysis was bad criminal law and civil law analysis. And then the next part of his analysis that was bad was completely misunderstanding how tax returns carry net operating losses forward. He thought those net operating losses were actual business losses. He doesn't understand how that works. He doesn't understand how depreciation works. He doesn't understand how asset valuation works. Folks, just think about your property tax bill. Your property tax bill is probably in most states, your appraised value of your home is probably way less than the actual what you could sell your home for. There's in California that's almost sort of written into the way the system's written, but that's pretty normal. That's because, and you would you go to great lengths to increase your appraised value for property tax purposes? No, you don't have to legally. So his analysis of he thought that Trump didn't have the asset value he did, and he assumed that the value that's being listed on the tax returns is the same as what he could get from those properties. It's not the same. It's different structure, different analysis altogether. He didn't understand how go ahead, sorry.
No, one thing was talking about the depreciation, where suggesting impropriety to depreciate the value of a building down to zero. But correct me if I'm wrong, Robert. Even if you depreciate the building down to zero, when you sell it, you have to pay capital gains tax on the value of that building. So you don't actually necessarily even reap that much of a benefit by doing it, because your capital gain becomes greater if you have in fact depreciated to zero. Am I wrong about that?
Yes, correct. No, that's correct. And the other component of that is that's typically done. I mean, the depreciation is there to incentivize real estate investment. This is all about he doesn't understand why the real estate tax codes work the way they do. He doesn't understand the policy purpose behind them, doesn't understand how they actually apply, doesn't understand tax treaties, doesn't understand civil tax law, doesn't understand payroll tax, income tax, gift tax, doesn't understand any of it. As I have never seen any video or presentation by any lawyer get as many tax facts wrong about the tax law in 30 minutes as legal. He set a record for being wrong. It's just, and this is who YouTube is promoting to people as a source of and fountain of legal knowledge. We also, by the way, got criminal tax law wrong. Once you have reliance, you have attorneys and accountants. You did it. He got good faith kind of right, but he got only half right. He still didn't understand it. He basically Googled, tax law and came up with a couple of cases and thought that defined it. Doesn't understand the scope and scale of it. Failed to mention that there's a reliance defense in tax law, so that not only is there, if you disagree with if you have a different interpretation of the law, but he made a crack at sovereign citizens. Oh, sorry, you don't have a defense based on your interpretation of the law being different than the IRS. Yes, you do. That was what the cheat case was about, that he actually cited. It was someone that he would call a quote unquote sovereign citizen, quote unquote tax protester. It was someone who had a different interpretation of the tax law than the IRS did. Not that the tax law was unconstitutional, but that the tax law interpreted consistent to the Constitution couldn't impose tax in the way that it claimed to, and in fact did not if you read the law a certain way. So he got that part wrong. You have a full reliance defense, so Trump is at zero criminal exposure. This is what Business Insider talked to a bunch of leading tax law experts, including me, and everybody came to the same conclusion. When I was talking to a reporter initially, she had some of the same misapprehensions as Legal did. And I was like, no, boom, 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 boom. She was like, well, I got to get this confirmed. She goes out and talks to 4 other top leading tax law people, many of whom are likely on the left. And they all say, no, what Barnes is saying is exactly right. So he gets all of that wrong. And then he misunderstands how debt works. He's like, oh, Trump has this balloon payment coming, and we don't know who does he owe the money to. Everybody knows who he owes the money to. He owes the money because lent based on property at less than 20% to value. The guy's at zero risk. When he says he's at great leverage, he's not kidding. He's at fantastic leverage. So the idea that he owes money to people we don't know, and look at this, there was a Russian that he doesn't mention the Miss World pageant was held in Russia many years ago, so of course there are Russian people who paid for that. It has nothing to do anything else with Trump. Doesn't understand how those pageants work in terms of how you tax profits. Pretends that Trump has just been losing money for 25 years and doesn't know how to run a business. I mean, it's just one idiotic statement after the next, after the next, after the next. It's the Legal Eagles had got a lot of stuff wrong, but this was the most egregious, most apparent. The kind you give it to any tax lawyer, they would say this guy's a joke and a crock and should not be allowed to speak in public.
It was, I sent it to Robert because I said he had to watch it, and I sent it to Nate as well. I sent it to the lawyers so we could all assess, because Robert does not mince his words as much as I do. But yeah, it was.
Plus, this happens to be one of my area of expertise. I've been doing tax law for almost 20 years. This is my top area of law that I do. So so I was curious about someone who clearly had no clue about it, what he was going to, and had a bias against Trump. But I still didn't expect it to have this many errors. Like Trump only paid $750, paid millions and millions and millions.
So let me, because that's something I didn't address in my video, and I think I probably should have, because I think it might be the source of perpetuating that, call it a myth for a lack of a better word. New York Times said he paid $750 in whatever year. From what I understand, that's an outright falsehood, because he in fact prepaid on that year, and that the $750 was a balance or something along those lines. Do you understand that nuance? Because a number of people are saying it's just an outright falsehood. He paid for that year, and the $750 was some other additional payment.
Correct. Yeah. So they don't have the full amounts that he paid individually in the New York Times story. So they're only able to identify a particular $750 payment, but not the rest of it. And so not only that, he's going to be paying individually. Other trusts or businesses that he has an interest in are going to be paying tax. His kids, of course, are paying tax. Those consulting fees, they had to pay tax on that, usually at the ordinary income rate. So I mean, that was not a favor to get consulting fees. That was this idea that consulting fees are a super secret way to evade tax. These people need their head examined. So it's in fact just the opposite. Consulting fees usually mean net higher taxes on everybody combined on that income. So all of it was just one absolute disaster of a video presentation, and it's probably the worst tax law presentation. It is the worst that I've ever witnessed.
I'm going to leave this super chat up because I cannot say no to the generosity of 64 Pink. Not that I don't play video games myself, but I play Double Dragon too. The glossing over of the 72 million credit that Trump received in 2009.
Oh. That was the other thing he got wrong. He claimed you could bring Title 18 charges for false refunds. No, you can't. There's a Klein conspiracy claim. False refunds is governed under Title 26. He's like, oh, you could bring a fictitious claim charge. No, that isn't how that is done. So, I mean, it's just everything he said was basically wrong and badly wrong. He would have failed elementary tax law as a first-year law student. I don't know how this guy got through law school.
Well, I think he probably got through law school when things were not politicized. But that and just failing to mention that very tax credit was set up specifically by Obama during the Great Recession, which was just to explain it, like maybe let people come to their own determination as to, even if it is improper in the moral sense, that law was set up for a very specific reason. And I mean, he said it during the 2016 elections, took advantage of those laws. They were not his laws to begin with.
Well, and they were necessary to rescue real estate. I mean, that was just the reality of it. And it was meant for the Trumps of the world. And what did Trump do with that money? He continued to invest in real estate. So the Trump was one of the few people who actually did what the tax provision was meant for. There's plenty of people that don't and did not. The banks got a lot of relief and were supposed to reinvest that capital, relend out that capital, and they didn't. Trump actually did what the tax laws encouraged him to do. Tax laws said, please continue to invest in real estate, given that it's collapsing around the United States at a precedent-setting level where all the banks and the whole financial system is, due to the securitized nature of most bank loans and real estate loans, was putting the entire liquidity of the economy at risk. And Trump did exactly what they wanted him to do. Went out and bought more real estate, branded more real estate, pushed more real estate, joined more real estate. So he did exactly what Obama's tax law was meant for.
Someone might come down because I hear more crying than I want to hear upstairs. So it's like trying to keep I don't know, a bear out of a bag of garbage or something. There's a kid who wants to come downstairs. Sakakianse says consulting fees disguise political payoffs. No, book contracts and sales. However, ask Barack and John Bolton. That was. Oh, Sorry, now it reminded me. One of the other issues he took issue with was having a business asset, one of the homes, which his children said that they spent the summer in, or they summered in. Now, two things. I mean, devil's advocate. One, I don't know if they paid rent or if they rented it out to do it. But even assuming that they didn't, you can have an investment property, I would imagine, like an Airbnb that you can use for personal time and maybe write off or not include 100% of the expenses. Am I misunderstanding?
That's precisely how they're used, especially with Trump. He brands his property by the family using the property. It's not like this is some sort of secret one. I mean, all of this was approved by accountants and attorneys before it ever ended up in a tax return, folks, by people that are actually competent and capable, not incompetent people like Legal. So you can fairly guess that it's entirely vetted and vouched for. But the second component, that's very commonplace. There's a lot of people that Airbnb their own properties, but there's a lot of people that have second properties that they treat as an investment property. And you can do that for two different reasons, by the way. It can be an investment property without ever Airbnb or vacationing it out. You're doing it for the purpose of you believe the value will go up. And your personal use of it is often considered maintenance. In fact, I know people, and where the IRS has legitimized it, where they are paid to occupy and use the property because they want to maintain it, they want to sustain it, and improve its brand quality. So especially, I mean, for example, celebrities are often paid to do these kind of things, right? And then to get, accidentally photographed by someone at this particular property becomes, you can double and triple its potential rental or ownership use. In Malibu, you just say so-and-so lived here for 5 years and bam, you get a deal, even if so-and-so never lived there for 5 years. You say, oh, you get to have Charlize Theron's house. Now, if you said Charlie Sheen's, they might skip it. But I like Charlie, by the way, great guy. Gave me the best cigar I ever smoked. Well, second best cigar I ever smoked.
Do I dare ask how much the best cigar you ever smoked would cost retail?
It was completely unavailable. He had a cigar that had not been made in 20 years. So he apparently had it from way back. It was a rare Davidoff Cuban-made cigar from the early 1980s, and they ceased production by the mid-1980s. And he gave it to me as a gift. It was a very nice. By me, he was always a very nice, generous guy. So people can have whatever criticisms they want. I don't have any. He was very nice and generous to me.
Amazing. And I'm going to read this. Gothic Serpent 99. Thank you. You and Mr. Barnes really mean so much to me. Thank you for your positive energy. It means more than I can express. Thank you very much, Gothic. And like I said, I screenshotted this and I may share it on social media tomorrow. Okay, I think we have clarified the inaccuracies of Legal Eagle's analysis of. Oh, let's see here. We got another one. Alex Aiello says, "Hi, I am an accountant. That article is joke. Nothing seemed out of the norm. The only issue is the IRS write-off argument. My guess is Trump's accountants are arguing the legitimacy of some expenses."
Yeah, I mean, it was just the nature of that size of net operating loss was going to trigger an audit. So he'll always be under audit. That's just the nature of the animal. Only the politically protected are not audited when they're in that scale and that size of refund or that size of tax credit. So, but yes, everybody who looked at that said that's totally normal. I mean, it was Nate had accountant friends of his look at it. They're like, this is totally normal. Nothing about this is abnormal.
There was an accountant who did an ABC interview, so it's totally normal, and. The leveraging, I mean, everyone tries to devalue the assets. It's an interesting thing. A lot of people say this. The golf courses are hemorrhaging money. Now, that's why I try to make a distinction because I don't necessarily understand it. They might be hemorrhaging money as businesses, but not as value of property. Because I imagine there are two things that are operating there. There's the business operating on a land and they're owned by two different entities. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that when I hear the golf courses are hemorrhaging money, I hear it from an operations perspective, not from building and land value perspective. And so they mean two very different things.
To Ian Mack's question, that might be true in other contexts, but not in Trump's context, because his entities are not C corps. His entities are almost all pass-through entities. So that means there could be no shifting from corporate to individual rate. Number two, the amount of money were such that they were all in the max rate. So the max individual rate is higher than the corporate rate. So there was no way that paying consulting fees would reduce the net amount of tax paid. And then third, remember, Trump has big deductions that his kids don't have. So that so Trump could absorb that money with paying no tax on it potentially, whereas his kids could not.
Okay, let's see this. I think we've done the rounds. This is going to clarify anyone who may have been it'll clarify for anyone who might have been swayed or at the very least had questions. Topo Musicale says things we know.
Epstein didn't kill himself. Sally Yates is corrupt. Judge Sullivan is a partisan hack. Kyle Rittenhouse acted in self-defense, and Legal is a clown.
I urge everyone, it's fun to make fun of the substance of arguments and all in good nature, but obviously keep it good natured. There's a part of me that says he cannot be unaware of the fact that people are going to pick out these issues. Like whenever I make a video, I take for granted if I get something wrong, I know someone's going to call it out, and I expect them to, because that's what knowledge is, and that's what getting smarter means. So I got to take for granted he knows it's going to happen, and just hope, I just don't want the good-natured ribbing and the pointing out of the inaccuracies to get to go anywhere beyond that. So bear that all in mind, out of respect.
And I'll be nice. I'm going to send him a dunce cap for Christmas.
All right, what do we got here? Jay Mill, is Trump's appointment of Fitton to the District of Columbia Commission on Judicial Disabilities and Tenure a funny shot across the bow to all the blatant political crap surrounding DC's courts? Okay, someone, I don't know who sent me this. Someone had asked me this as well. I don't know anything about this, so can you explain what this means?
Jay Mill's description is precisely accurate. It doesn't have a lot of power historically, but it's a commission on judicial conduct for the District of Columbia, and he put Tom Fitton on it. And he did it right after Trump did. Trump appointed Tom Fitton to that committee, and that committee, for example, presides over Judge Sullivan. So that's my guess. Now, can he do much with it? No, but I think that it was Trump's way of thanking Judge Sullivan for what he did.
But who is Fitton as an individual?
Tom Fitton, head of Judicial Watch.
Okay. And Judicial Watch is the ones who have made a number of successful FOIA requests. Okay, now I get the joke, everybody. Okay, excuse me. Now what do we have here? Now do the whole explanation of EBITDA, earning before income tax depreciation and amortization.
Oh, you got it. That's good. That's impressive. Most people don't know that.
Oh, no, I sometimes know more than I let on, but then I sometimes don't let it all on because I don't want to make stupid mistakes. But yeah, EBITDA, for anybody who knows, is now how is it applied? I only rely on my accountant. But I actually don't apply EBITDA because I don't think I have any real estate other than our house. Okay, so what do we do now? Let's move on to another topic.
Well, we have the second idiot lawyer of the week, Popat. They promote him heavily. The media loves him. Ever since Trump got elected, he's gone insane. He suffers from a severe version of TDS, who suggested to people that Trump and everybody connected to Trump should be in jail and charged with a crime because they have COVID and might have spread it. And for folks out there, this won't be very long. This will be very short. Aside from Popat being just an arrogant prick, he's gone completely off his bonkers. To give you an example, in California, they had to pass a law for this because typically it's not criminalized at all. If you have HIV, you can't even be charged. You can't be charged with a felony. Period. It's just a misdemeanor. But if you have HIV, know you have HIV, have sexual activity with someone else, that activity is unprotected, and you give them HIV, you still cannot be charged with a crime unless you intended to give them HIV. So the idea that somehow having COVID and infecting someone else could be a crime is completely ludicrous. So there's no legal basis for that whatsoever, no predicate for that, not only as it relates to Trump, as to anyone else. Indeed, most businesses and other people cannot be sued for issues related to COVID. Now they're expanding liability, but this has been established for 100 years. So you couldn't be sued for something, a flu or a fever or anything like that. You have to intend to cause that effect on people. Now, even then, that still is not a crime in most places. I mean, that's why they had to pass a special law for HIVs, because the law was not criminally punishable before then. Even for knowingly giving someone an STD was not a crime. So the idea that somehow it was criminal if Trump knew he had COVID and interacted with any other human being before he went to the hospital is just ludicrous. It's just not based on the law. There's no legal basis or foundation for it whatsoever, and the law refutes it, rejects it.
So first of all, when you sent that to me as a topic and I looked it up, I thought Popat was a parody account, and I'm not saying this as a joke. I thought it was a parody account until I saw that he was actually being cited in like legit Google searches. Was it never recognized as assault to give someone an STD? Like I remember with Mike Tyson and his girlfriend, back in the day, there was an issue as to whether or not he committed assault by giving her an STD.
The problem is it almost never meet the legal standard for it. So if you intend to give someone a virus, a medical condition, there's a theory under which it could be either assault or battery. But generally, the way the law is interpreted, that it requires such a level of intent that it's almost impossible to meet. So, like when I was in law school, our test question involved a guy sharing a needle with a prostitute, and what was this, and who could be criminally prosecuted. And it depended on you knowing about a whole bunch of things, but you really have to intend for the person with a shared needle to actually get the disease. The high risk of it doesn't necessarily is inadequate. So even in that context, where they looked at needle sharing as potential predicate for criminal prosecution, you're going to be hard pressed to find almost any case where they've established that. So there's a reason why California had to actually pass a special law to govern it, and when they did, they still required intentional transmission. And not just intentional risk. I intend this person to get this disease.
No, and from what I understand, also they just recently reduced it from a felony to a misdemeanor.
Yes, that's correct. It's a misdemeanor currently.
Amazing. Now I say amazing in a fascinating and yet totally incredulous. I don't know if that's the right word. But hold on. The question that I had was about the virus. So I read the accusation, the thought. What I find amazing is that nobody stops for a second to think that the entire team might be knowingly working through these risks. Like this is, they may have signed a waiver already saying, we know that we are continuing to work the front lines. We may very well get it. I think just politically, not legally. For what looks bad is Trump's comments on face masks in the past, and now everybody seems to be putting them on because everybody's gotten it. But this idea that they could be criminally charged or have even civilly, I take for granted they all know what they're working through. Same thing with his Secret Service agents, and there's a bunch of tweets going on about this now that Trump for a photo op, did a tour with his Secret Service agents and exposed them to the virus. First of all, it's tough for some people to appreciate. Not everybody is traumatized fear of this virus in the first place, and his Secret Service agents have to be with him regardless and are literally there to be willing to die for him. They probably would rather get the virus than get a bullet. I mean, it's like the risk factors of what they think other people believe because they believe it are just through, over the top. But it's just, the power lies in the accusation, and the power lies in the headline, and the power lies in people retweeting the tweet and getting that negative idea out in the minds of people who are susceptible to believing it.
And if people understand the scope of this, why the law is limited the way it is, every human being has some transmittable disease in their body. So if we started suing people or holding people criminally liable because they spread it, it would create massive legal risk for everybody. And all of a sudden you couldn't have people that, okay, if you have a transmittable disease, you can no longer interact with human beings anymore. I mean, that's where that logically leads to. That's why that never made any sense. That's why the law was never going to be that way. And that's why the standards are so strict and so constricted.
I had no idea Pope Hat was serious with the accusation. I mean, I thought it was it's over the top. I mean, I can understand if someone knows that they have it and then goes around coughing on the broccoli at the grocery store. And I think there's other provisions of law that apply for that type of behavior. D. Gonzalez says, Fry, Barnes, Uncivil, and Nate, always reliable legal analysis, legal titans. Thank you very much. And I'm sure Nate and Legal Eagle and Barnes appreciate it as well.
You mean Nate and Uncivil and Barnes?
Uncivil, yes. Sorry. Nate, Uncivil, and Robert.
You briefly mentioned Legal Eagle, and we shall not know.
Did I? Yeah. Okay. That was definitely I don't even want to say a Freud, and it would imply an underlying thought. Jermaine Strandlund says, Barnes, any good business lawyers in Minnesota, bought 3 acres of light industrial land in Minnesota and looking to break ground in the next year or two.
For any specific questions like that, just go to my website and send in a question, and I'll get back to you if I can. So at barneslawllp.com for specific questions.
Okay, and those should also be in the links of all the streams, just in case.
Because everything on here is not a, what's the ethical requirement?
None of this qualifies as legal advice, especially coming from a Canadian lawyer in his basement. So it is for educational purposes only. You'll get smarter, but none of this is particularized legal advice, which is what everyone needs when they need legal advice. And this question I had, this is not law. This is just Robert bets on the markets, and Robert is into the political betting. Does Barnes think Trump's COVID helps or hurts his election chances odds? For many, this may humanize him and give him a soapbox to stand on for reopening.
Yeah, for all of that, I'll talk on each Monday. I'm on People's Pundit, which people can find on YouTube at 2 p.m. Eastern time. and we break down. The show's called "What Are the Odds," and I'll break down what I think that is.
Okay, now I'm going to look at the screen because I'm screenshotting this. Boom. 10,000 people watching, Robert. The one thing I've always wanted to do, I don't know what's going to happen. If there are 10,000 people watching right now and everyone at the same time just puts in the word in the comments 10,000 or something, it doesn't matter. If 10,000 people comment in the same second, what happens? Let's see. Can we do it? I'm just going to watch at the side of the screen as we transition to the next subject. I've always wanted to know what would happen when 10,000 people at one time put in a comment. We'll see. And this is not a game to try to increase the comments. I can't believe I've never thought about doing this before. I just want to see the comment section go for cascade forever. Holy cow, we've been going for an hour and a half as well. Okay, what were the other topics? There was one other topic. Sorry, you know what? Forget the topic. I need to understand something because I'm trying to have these discussions with friends and family. The ballot voting. And what is the state now of the various lawsuits? I guess if you didn't start from the beginning of this, we hear news about, ballots being found in ditches. The media wants to know which river in particular, who the they and what's the river. But there are reports of ballots being found ditched in dumpsters. We don't know about how many. We don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Not propensity. We don't know how broad of a problem it is. We hear about people receiving ballots at former addresses or receiving multiple ballots. For someone who might have difficulty putting this into context as to why it's a risk, can you explain the inherent risks? Like, what are the risks? What does it mean when a box of ballots turns up in a dumpster? What does it mean when people receive 2 ballots? Set aside the cash for ballots because that's easier corruption to understand. But just like the risks of the mail-in ballot and what's at issue and what the state of the legal proceedings are now, coming that election is a month away.
Sure. So historically, the reason why the Constitution didn't anticipate anything like this is because voting used to be public. So that, often it was the town hall format, but everybody would physically go there. There was no intermediary between you and your vote. You expressed your vote. You saw it recorded right there. The Australians came up with the secret ballot, and we created that. Well, there's 2 arguments. One was to make elections more anonymous and protect your speech rights. But in truth, the other arguably was that they didn't like political machines having power. So the way political machines would have powers, when you're walking into the ballot or walking into the election precinct, you'd be given a party ballot. And sometimes it'd be identified by a color or by an animal. You'd get like the rooster ballot, whoever. And this is how political machines organized. They gave you a ballot already marked. You went in and just stuck it in there. This also dealt with literacy issues and other issues. And so by going to a secret ballot, we actually made it more difficult for political machines to organize. Some people liked that. Some people did not. Arguably, it undermined working class political power in the country, but that ship has sailed. So we go to the secret ballot, but still that ballot is done in person throughout almost all of our history. And then 1920s, 1930s, I think, is when we first start getting absentee ballots. And that was meant for people that were disabled and then ultimately soldiers to be able to vote while they're away from their homes, military ballots. So, and then the absentee balloting system beginning 90s, early 2000s starts to expand into various forms. We start getting early voting, what's called early voting. So rather than having voting on election day, you can vote for weeks or sometimes up to a month, sometimes up to 6 weeks before election day. And we, in some states, start doing mail-in balloting, like Colorado and Oregon especially. And it depends on the protocol. Almost all the states that have absentee balloting, the concern is instead of you walking into the precinct and putting your ballot right into the ballot box or some form thereof, now all of a sudden you have all these intermediaries to determine whether your expression of will gets represented in the actual counting of the ballots, because now there's the post person who's going to deliver the ballot. And on top of that, there's questions about whether you yourself actually filled out that ballot. When you walk into the precinct, it can only be you that walks into the voting booth. You cast the ballot. Your vote counts. There can't be anyone else in there. No one else can see your ballot. No one else can know who you're voting for. The world doesn't even know who you're voting for. It's purely a secret ballot, anonymous. That there's a risk of that not happening with anonymous ballots, because before they give it to the postman, somebody could see how you voted. And someone could, coerce you or blackmail you or bribe you into voting a particular way. So all of those risks went up because you no longer have the anonymity of someone being at the precinct voting in person with the securities and the controls in place. So the Democrats for this election used COVID as the pretext to want to do massive mail-in balloting. The second, so the first thing they wanted to get rid of was the per people voting in person. There used to be limitations, and there still are in a lot of states, on absentee balloting that says only certain people can request it. You have to qualify for it. And the reason for that is they wanted to keep absentee balloting to a minimum and wanted people to vote in person. So part one is Democrats wanted to eliminate all of those restrictions on who can cast an absentee ballot. The second protocol to make sure absentee ballots were done legally was that they be notarized, that someone else is there, sees that it was you, in fact, who filled out that ballot. It's not someone else claiming to be you sending it in, and that there's no one else present, so there was no coercion or bribery taking place because no one could see who you voted for at the time you did your ballot. That notary requirement, or affidavit requirement, as it's called in some states, affidavits have slowly shifted to things called declarations in the modern age, but that varies by state and jurisdiction. The Democrats wanted to get rid of that requirement, so that there was no longer, and again, under the guise that, well, that notary would be there and the notary somehow will get COVID, I guess, and so forth. The third is that the requirement has always been that you have to request the ballot. This makes sure that people don't receive ballots who did not request them. This also makes sure that inactive voters don't get, and those people who are not actively on, who have moved or who have died, don't get ballots sent to them or get sent to an address where they no longer live. The Democrats wanted to get rid of that as well. So what ended up happening, and it varies by state. So in some states, the government refused to do that, like in Maine, like in Texas, some other places. So Democrats sued to require them to do that as a matter of constitutional rights and under the COVID context. All of those suits where the government refused to loosen the standards to allow massive mail-in balloting, the Republicans have won, and they've said there's no constitutional right to have massive mail-in balloting without these fraud strictures in place. On the other hand, there have been other states where Democrats have imposed it. In Nevada is one example, other places, and so far suits to stop it from happening have been unsuccessful. The courts have allowed the Democrats to get rid of all the fraud limitations that they want and do massive mail-in balloting. And then as a third set of states, like in Michigan to some degree, like in Wisconsin to some degree, where you have judges, local judges requiring it and imposing these requirements or adding these. And one of the big ones is you have all those strictures, but one of the key metrics to stop fraud is to require that all ballots be received by election day. So, Colorado, California, Florida, Oregon, other states that do a lot of mail-in balloting. California's been bad, but Colorado, Oregon, Florida, they've been able to count all the ballots by election day. They want to extend when the ballot can come in so that the ballot can show up at the election office 3 days later, 7 days later, in Nevada, 14 days later. Their excuse is that there'll be such a deluge on the post office may fail to timely deliver a ballot that's been timely postmarked. The problem in Nevada is the postmark is questionable. And as the postmark standard is so loose that knowing whether it was really postmarked in time is up for grabs. Secondly, the Postal Carriers Union has endorsed Biden. So your risk of postal workers posting something as being postmarked when it wasn't sent out on election day goes up. And so you're on mute, Viva.
That would explain a few things. Sorry, this would go back to that law that we were talking about not getting political when you're on a federal employee. I forget what the law was.
Hatch
Act. So now this would be the prime example where the risk is you have the people delivering the ballots getting political on the job, and now you're like, yeah, but send us your ballots. And if you're in a high Republican riding, we have to take for granted that I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but this is where people say, yeah, if it's in a high Republican riding, for some reason those ballots get lost or they end up being found in a ditch sometime down the line. Now see it all when law and politics comes together, it actually makes sense, and that is the essence of the Hatch Act. And this OG Boxer, the chat that I have up here now, this is an interesting one as well. So typically when people, you can get the voting slip to let you know where you have to vote. If you're dead, you're not going to show up unless there's overt fraud, someone pretending to be you. If ballots arrive at people's houses and they've been long deceased, if they get mailed in, nobody knows that they're getting mailed in by a deceased person. That's another one of the real issues about ballot fraud.
Oh, absolutely. So the problem is that people that have moved, the great concern is this: a bunch of ballots get mailed out, and a bunch of ballots come back from people who actually didn't cast that ballot. That's problem one. In other words, people who are dead, people have moved, but there's a valid ballot there. And one of the other mechanisms to check this was, one, make sure the ballot comes in by election day. The reason for that is you don't want a situation where they know, okay, we're 20,000 votes short in Pennsylvania, so let's make sure over the next 7 days after election day, we magically get another 20,000 ballots show up. That's the concern of the election day issue. The concern of the ballot issue is also ballot signatures, checking the ballot signature against a validated voter registration signature. And the concerns there actually cut both ways, because if strictly enforced, Democrats have often had a problem with people not signing their name consistent to their voter registration. In New York and New Jersey, you had 20 to 30% of ballots be struck down as invalid. Democrats are starting to figure out that if there was actual enforcement of the law, massive mail-in balloting would probably hurt them rather than help them.
Sorry, who strikes down ballots that are being deemed to be invalid?
So what happens is the ballot comes in, and before the ballot is counted, what's supposed to happen in most states is they're supposed to check the signature on the outside of the ballot form, not the ballot itself, but there's a something you put on the outside, the envelope, and usually it's inside another envelope, where you've signed saying this is my ballot. They're supposed to check that signature against your voter registration file signature and make sure it's the same, because this is supposed to be the check on making sure that the person who voted actually is the person who was eligible to vote, not Junior voting for mom and dad and grandma and grandpa, not one person, or voting for dead people or whatever. But the problem is, in a lot of states, they don't want to strictly enforce that rule. And because now there's a legitimate reason, in part because people often don't sign their name in the same way over long periods of time. So a lot of legitimate ballots may actually get thrown out because of this. But it's the only available check against people just doing bogus ballots. It's really the only meaningful check against that occurring. So like the risk of people getting 200,000 ballots, say in Nevada, getting sent out to people that are dead or have moved, that's not a concern if you're checking the signature, because the probability somebody matches the signature is pretty low. So most of those ballots would be flagged in the voter validation, signature validation sequence. But then you're entirely dependent on, one, that protocol being enforced, and two, that the people who are looking at that signature don't have a political reason to pretend it's valid when it isn't. And this is why the litigation will make Bush v. Gore look like the dwarf version, look like the mini-me version of what's coming. Because that's where if everybody voted in person, as many people as possible, this risk is way low. You still have risk of voter fraud, but it's way, way less. This invites massive voter fraud. And unfortunately, the 11th Circuit, Judge Lagoa, for everybody out there remembering, she struck down, as she ruled in the right way on all these elections, said, no, you have to get it returned by election day. The 7th Circuit, including a Trump judge that was voted almost exactly with Barrett and was on that same Jacobson decision, went the other way and said that, in fact, you can extend the election law deadline further, and issued an injunction against the attempt of the lower court to say, no, that's unconstitutional. So right now, many of the states still have wide open mail-in balloting that we've never seen before, on a scale we've never seen before.
Wide open mail-in balloting, which means that they're going to be counted so long as they are postmarked prior to the election, which is why this narrative of it's totally normal if it takes us a few weeks to know who won the election is coming out from Zuckerberg and other people who control what people think.
Only California's had that problem. Only California's had the problem of having slow counting. And even then, usually the ballot, depending on the county, depending on when the election was held for California, only California took a month to count ballots. And usually even then it was still it wasn't up to 14 days postmark. That's unprecedented. That's what we're going to have in Nevada. So we're going to have 14 days of when a ballot can show up. Anybody who knows the political history of Nevada knows likelihood of voter fraud ain't low.
I wish I could go back in time with the knowledge I have now and relive the Bush versus Gore hanging. The only thing I remember about it is the hanging Chad. I mean, that's what I remember. It was, what year was it? 2000. I was 19 years old, 20 years old, couldn't care less about any of this stuff. But now Peter Bemis says this. I wanted to get to the super chat. No one's talking about older people who are financially dependent on their children. They are going to be forced to vote against their desires. Well, and this brings us into the Project Veritas video, which people have been asking me to, comment on. But it is what it is. My opinion is just going to be my opinion. But what we see in that video, which is people basically just being paid for their ballots and sign it this way, and here's a lunch and here's money, whatever. Does that? I want to say, is that fraud? That is illegal. I mean, it's illegal, right? On its face, it's illegal.
Yeah. Well, it depends. So you can effectively, well, this way, it's not clearly illegal for you to pay someone to go to the polls. It's illegal for you to pay them for a vote. So it depends on what's happening. It's like the Bloomberg, Florida question. Are you paying them so that they vote? Or are you paying them for a particular vote? Or are you paying off their fines to make them eligible to vote? So, for example, there's always a lot of political organization. Well, this has been true for forever. Ed Rollins got caught on tape doing it way back, I think, in the late 90s in New Jersey. They call it passing around money. So what happens is, particularly in a lot of black political machines, some Mexican-American, West Texas political machines, what you do is you go to the political organizer and they can basically deliver you a certain percentage of votes. People should ask, how did Mike Bloomberg get a lot of Democratic votes in places like, southern Black Belt, Alabama? Well, was it because they were so in love with his stop and frisk policy from New York City? Maybe not. Maybe it's because he paid a bunch of organizers a bunch of cash who could guarantee you 10 to 20% of the vote in their local neighborhood. And how does that happen? It happens because you give them, say, $100,000, and they give $100. You say, hey, you're going to vote. Here's what you're going to vote for. Hey, here. And so technically now what mail-in balloting allows you to do is to make sure you're getting your money's worth. Right. The problem when you pay some guy $100, he goes. You don't know what the person. You don't know what the person could just lie to you. He could just say, "Oh yeah, whatever." And sometimes it's whiskey. In the old days, it used to be whiskey bottles and liquor bottles. You would do so. That still happens to this day. I mean, I grew up in Democratic political campaigns. Never been a registered Democrat. I would say I leaned Democrat up until 2015, but it was mostly politically agnostic since 1994. Bill Clinton educated me on that. I was an intern in the White House for Bill Clinton. No, I did not meet Monica Lewinsky, which is always the second question asked. But I did know that she didn't get her job legit because no intern ever had since Diane Sawyer. So as soon as I found out she had a job, I was like, oh, Billy Boy. I got some other stories about Billy Boy for another day.
Another stream entirely. Incidentally, I wish I could go live through that again with the knowledge that I have today. I was 13 or 14 when that happened, I think.
Yeah, I was in DC for part of that. Ended up accidentally in some stories that some books that got written. I was a kid. I got a lot of stories from that. But yeah, maybe we one of those campfire. The guy that had the idea that me, you, Viva, Nate, and Uncivil and Nate do a little special edition campfire little thing. We'll see.
The borders have to open up before we can do that. I'm just going to bring this one up. Terry Ebert Mendoza, just in case he's still watching, show me some more love for Viva and Barnes. You can hit $100. Mine only goes to $99.99. Thank you very much. Either way, I hear noise. I hear someone coming down. I hear two people coming down. Okay. Let's just see. I think we covered. Oh, here's some Harry.
The guinea pig.
And here is another kid. Here's another. Just let me get this out. Just a pig. No kid. He's not a pig. He's a good kid.
Well, hey, the nice thing, if they lived in the United States, they probably could vote in this election.
Say that again.
I say if they lived here, they could probably vote in Nevada.
So, okay, I think now I fully appreciate the. It's going to
go up to the Supreme Court. There's a federal statute that says election day has to be one day, and that would at least stop all these counting these ballots after election day, which would de-incentivize a lot of the fraud that could occur. Because down deep, they don't want to steal ballots if they don't have to. So that's why Trump understands the big risk is counting ballots after election day, having them arrive after election day, because then the fraud will be off the charts. So if the Supreme Court rules that it has to come in on election day, and I hope they will rule, and I think one of the cases will go up to the Supreme Court. I think one of them is already potentially pending before the U.S. Supreme Court. That could at least stop that portion. But the rest of it's just going to be crazy. So if people thought, looking at Chad's was iffy, what about looking at 1 million+ voter signatures to see whether they're really valid or not? Good luck with that.
Which brings me to another question that I've never thought to ask: who's checking the signatures? Are these state actors? Are they federal employees? Are they political party actors?
All state employees, all the local election commission, usually county employees, in fact. So in Broward County, they have an interesting habit of always reporting late in Florida. So folks should look up Broward County corruption elections and see what percolates up. But imagine what happens in Broward County times 10 in some of these other areas. Like, there's a reason why Trump called out Philadelphia. Philadelphia is going to be a problem. Detroit's going to be a problem. What you have is Democratic governors and Democratic political machines in vote-rich areas that could steal a lot of ballots and have a long history of it. That's how Daley did it in Chicago for John Kennedy, and that's why John Kennedy was president instead of Richard Nixon.
So where we had the hanging chads in 2000, now we're going to have, like, whether or not the IDs, the signatures sufficiently matched to be counted. That's going to be the discussion this time around? And
then if they allow ballots to come in after Election Day, then it's going to be whether the postmark is valid or not. So there's going to be postmark issues. There's going to be valid, but the big one will be valid signature issues, and we'll see how it goes.
And now, Alyosha says, don't roughly half the states have voter ID laws?
Yes, but several don't. But the voter ID law doesn't matter if you're not requiring an affidavit, a notarized affidavit for the signature. What acts as the voter ID is solely the signature. And what happens if you have very loose or no standards for those validating the signatures? And I have a hard time believing that they have the staffing to validate this number of signatures.
What's going to be the criteria for establishing whether or not a signature matches? Especially, I imagine the one on the voter roll. How does it get there? Is it digitized or is it a physical signature?
Well, here's the other thing. It's usually a physical signature, but sometimes, it depends. In some counties and states, it's purely digitized now, and some they actually have the old physical signature. The other issue with it is, here's the risk. The risk is where all the ballots could be stolen are going to be controlled by local Democratic political machines, because that's the voter-rich areas in these swing states, and with a history of voter corruption, voter fraud. So you're going to have a Democratic Philadelphia state county official determining whether or not a ballot counts from a precinct they are likely going to know is a 90% Democratic precinct. So how strictly are they going to impose those standards?
Okay, so W. McMaster says, Viva, my super chat asked Barnes how individual states control the federal election voting rules.
They control them all because our federal elections are actually just state elections. So now there's a federal law that says elections for federal office all have to happen on the same day. So that's an existence of a federalized standard that all states are supposed to apply to. But clearly they're not applying to them right now, or they're interpreting them to only require a postmark rather than delivery or receipt. But we have always been a confederate. We're the United States of America, not United America. As I always tell people that talk about the popular vote, we don't have a popular vote. We have 50 states that get together and vote.
And I get corrected on this all the time. It is not a democracy. It's a constitution. What is it? A constitutional republic?
People like to use that phrase, constitutional republic. I call it a constitutional democracy, but it's a combined amongst the states. I know what people mean. People mean that there's all these checks on power and so forth. But a lot of what they defined as a republic at the time, we have since abandoned. We no longer require virtue as a condition of citizenry. We no longer require race or gender as a condition of citizenry. Property holding is a condition of citizenry. Having a skin in the game is a requirement of citizenry, etc. So it's less and less like what people think of as a republic, at least from a political science perspective. You can make a good argument that we're still along those ways, but I think of us as a constitutional democracy. But it's a confederation of states. So that's where power originates. That's where our elections have. We're a bunch of 50 states that are together. It's like all the different countries of Europe and the EU.
All right. Now, by the way, one thing I do realize when 10,000 people comment at the same time, it blasts all of the super chats off the screen and I can't get back to them. Craig Leno 514 says, will Barrett be on the court in time to decide the case involving ballots after election if she is confirmed? And if so, what are the odds of Roberts and Barrett ruling that it is impermissible?
I think Barrett was, I do believe that she was picked because she was on the Bush v. Gore team. She was one of the lawyers that was part of that team. And so I think Barrett would rule that election day is one day. I can't be sure. Like I said, her comrade in arms, St. Eve, the Seventh Circuit, who she voted with a lot, including on the lockdown case, just said the opposite, just gave a stay. So that allows the mail-in balloting continue to come in after election day in those states in the Seventh Circuit. So but I think in Roberts, open question. But I mean, here it's how much chaos do they want, and how much do their people will be able to in time prove the fraud. So Trump's already made clear he's not going gently into the good night if he suspects fraud.
And now, and Anthony Laura says, what happens if a fraudulent mail-in ballot comes in for person X and person X, not knowing it, goes to vote in person? So
that's why Trump was recommending what he was.
This is what Trump was saying, is that somebody can intercept someone's ballot, vote for them, and then this person goes into vote and says, oh, we already got your vote. And he wants it. So actually, let me back that up. Is that to say, test the system by sending in your vote and then going to vote in person? Or is that to test the fraud, as in someone intercepts your ballot and then you go to vote and you say, oh, you've already been voted for? Or both? It was both.
It was both. And so there's definitely risk that occurs. So now some states you can check online and see whether or not you're listed as having already voted. I don't think that will be a high risk. The way in which you commit voter fraud is you get groups that are overwhelmingly Democratic by demographics, and you just report a bunch of votes you send in a bunch of votes on their behalf, so that and that's how you do it. You don't take the risk. Republicans would have a much harder time doing voter fraud. They can still do it. In fact, they got caught doing it in North Carolina, again using mail-in balloting to do so just in 2018. Though that was about a political consultant doing it against other people. But it's always high risk, but it's much easier to get away with in Democratic circles, because how do you there are ways. The objective metric to watch is going to be to watch unusual turnout tendencies. So if we see, like, the states that don't have these kind of loose standards, if we see, say, African-American precincts, for example, turn out at 90% of the 2016 level, and yet in Philadelphia they turn out at 225%, well, so that it will be hard for them to hide the scale of the fraud. They really can commit fraud within a point. If the election's within a point, more than a point, hard to do it, not get caught.
It's very interesting. I mean, it is fascinating. What's especially fascinating is if you need to know how many ballots you need or how many votes you need in certain districts, and then you can find them, and
that's why Trump is obsessed about all ballots being counted on election day.
Well, it makes
go way up if they allow him to come in afterwards.
At least I understand the rationale. Everyone's going to say, well, it's an exaggerated fear. But again, like I said, I'm from Canada. We vote in municipal elections. You have to have 2 pieces of ID and a piece of paper basically saying you live at the address that's on your ID. And nobody complains. It seems like common sense. David DeKaiser says, and I think the answer to this is a big fat no. Viva, question for Barnes. Could there be a law mandating a media blackout and reporting during the election?
No, but here's the interesting thing. What happens when big tech as a private sector does it voluntarily, like they're talking about doing, right? So that's what happens when your means of communication, I mean, this new rule that says, okay, it's not the state doing it, it's just your telephone company and your internet company doing it. But that has the same effect without any remedy.
Oh, so that's it. And exponentially more efficient than could ever be done by government regulation.
Absolutely.
Carol W. says, when I lived in New Mexico, I guess that is, an older woman in front of me in the evening was told she had voted earlier and was mad. They wouldn't let her vote. New Mexico doesn't use ID. Just ask what your name, address was. What can stop this?
Well, and for people out there think, oh, this is, Larry Sabato and other people that I respect. He follows me on Twitter, but he says this has never happened. There's been no voter fraud, whatever. Just read some insider books by Mark Halperin about the 2008, 2012 election, but 2008. And listen to what Bill Clinton has to say. Bill Clinton had zero doubt that Obama stole the Iowa caucuses by bringing in votes en masse in buses. So why did the Democratic president believe that was even possible to occur if it never happens? So that's a good question to ask. One the media ain't going to be asking anytime soon. So they've made it as easy as possible to commit the most brazen and bold voter fraud ever. They're doing it with polls. The political opinion polls are predicting this magical 40 million, 50 million new voters who've never voted before are suddenly going to show up in 2020, even though all the underlying data says that's not going to happen. They're doing it to justify when magically all those people's ballots show up when even they didn't know they voted.
No, it is once you see how the media, it builds the narrative, it conditions you to believe something that has yet to occur, so that if and when it occurs for whatever the reason, you don't ask as many questions and you don't have as much shock, and you're not as offended or as suspicious as you would otherwise be. But for that prelude, call it prelude to a lie. It's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing.
Actually, preconditioning. They call it preconditioning in psychology.
Okay, but I prelude to a lie is romantic almost. Owen Jones asked a question which is not going to have an answer. Barnes, can you well, it's going to have an answer. No one's going to like the answer. Barnes, can you explain it to me? How does someone justify stealing an election? It erodes the bedrock legitimacy of the government as being of the people, for the people, by the people.
Absolutely, it does. So they got to get away with it. You know, I mean, everybody knew Kennedy stole 1960. Everybody knew he stole it both in the primaries, West Virginia. Those West Virginia Baptists didn't line up to vote for the Catholic for president, not back in 1960. And they knew he stole it from Illinois. Nixon knew it. And Nixon had to be a good boy and stay quiet and go duly into the good night. LBJ learned to steal after an election was stolen from him in Texas. So it's the oldest game in town. But the key to it was keeping Trump, was trying to induce Trump to say he'll accept the results no matter what. And Trump, of course, he's not going to let them steal an election from him. So they're naive about that. They'll fight that tooth and nail. And that's where they run risk. That's why what they would really like is to know how many votes they need to steal in it for it to be less than 1%.
That's phenomenally insightful, and people might call it a conspiracy theory. That is just a concise explanation of the risk and the fears and the problem. And interesting, this is what I love is when the same political party holds two mutually incompatible principles in law. David Nichols says, I just bought a gun in California and I had to present ID and prove residency with a utility bill in addition. But to vote, you don't have to present anything. Just know your name and your address. It is, and these are two mutually incompatible political positions held by the same party on constitutional issues. What was the other one? There was another one. I don't remember, but it's an amazing thing when there are no ways of logically reconciling two mutually incompatible views held by the same person. And that's where I guess, where they say if politicians didn't have double standards, they would have no standards at all. Robert, I think it's a good time we should end this. I mean, this has been, we've covered everything. I mean, I think we covered everything, and I don't want to get into a subject which we won't be able to do justice to. I'm going to thank everybody because this was another 10,000 people watching. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I never thought in a million years it would ever happen, and never even thought ever it would happen. Just amazing. Douglas Weber says, looks like Canada requires you to bring the mail-in ballot with you if you vote. Oh, California requires you to bring in the mail-in ballot with you if you vote in person. Okay, let's see if I just didn't miss any that we can just get on the end here, because I think that's a perfect wrap-up of the mail-in ballot question. We're going to see now I understand why they're hiring hundreds of lawyers and expecting. The question is going to be, is this going to mobilize the more energetic of the parties where, with any luck, it won't be close enough for these issues to be determinate issues, but counting ballots that are not received by Election Day, I don't know how anybody can think that's not a problem. I mean, it's one way or the other. I don't care what district it would come from. Otherwise, it can go on indefinitely, and then who knows what. One question was, someone asked something about Flynn. I can't do it. I brought it up, but let's end it off.
The only other topic we didn't cover, but there's more information developing, and so it'll be for a later live stream, will be the Breonna Taylor case. I do think there's growing evidence of a cover-up down there, and if people want to see who the main actor is, just Google the little fun research item. Look for who the Kentucky Attorney General worked for before he became Attorney General. Look who would require a certain person's approval before he would be appointed United States Attorney for that district in Kentucky. And that will be a little bit of a clue as to where I think some of the cover-up complicit participants are.
Okay,
and by the way, it's the same person responsible for almost all of Trump's worst appointments because he controls the appointment process in a certain way. So I'll let everybody Google it. But otherwise, we'll get into much detail later on because that's its own thing about how, and it'll be a directional guide how to try to cover up a political scandal like that. In the Breonna Taylor case, it will be a how-to guide to know.
Let's leave it on the actual update. The actual update was that the police officer who was shot in the leg might have been shot by the police officer behind him and not by Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, as initially stated to the grand jury.
That's one of them. The other thing is it's clear now that they did, in fact, lie in the affidavit. that they said that the post office confirmed that she was receiving packages for the target, the drug dealer target. It turned out the post office had said exactly the opposite, and it was the police officer who confirmed that on 4 different occasions. And there's a wide range of other cover-up behavior. So it may still be that the case. Oh, it also turns out they did not properly instruct the grand jury on the facts. They didn't properly instruct the grand jury on the law. They basically guided the grand jury to the outcome they came to, and a wide range of other behaviors. I mean, I when we discussed it with the whole team, the whole group, I pointed out that $12 million settlements don't happen without something lurking in the background, and there's more and more evidence that they're trying to cover up something in the Breonna Taylor case. It may not be the full scale and scope of it, but it looks like there was some bad deeds by high-ranking political and police officers, and there's an effort afoot to hide that from the public and the world.
And incidentally, the other, I'll pretend it was a deliberate omission, because the news. The problem is you do an update on the Breonna Taylor situation with the facts that you have at the time. Now they're evolving sufficiently fast that analysis today will not necessarily be accurate the day after tomorrow. So we didn't get into the details. We're definitely going to cover it. If it's not in a midweek stream, at the very least next week, when whatever new developments are out there will give us a fuller idea. I do apologize for missing it. And Owen Jones, let's end it on this, Barnes. Robert, I hope you don't mind me calling you Barnes. Barnes book and movie suggestion homework for this week. First of all, what do you have behind you, and what do you recommend?
So that's a good biography of Clarence Darrow, a lawyer I have great respect for. Didn't always agree with him politically. He was probably on the Bryan side rather than the Darrow side in certain respects in the great Dayton Scopes trial. But was partially with Darrow, partially with Bryan. But yeah, a great book on Clarence Darrow, great biography, great. The title's great, Attorney for the Damned, and was one of the great, willing to take real risks. They, I think, tried to prosecute him 4 different times criminally, went after him ethically, went after him every other way. So it's educational, informative, a template for if you're a dissident lawyer, how you're going to be treated. I'm surprised I managed not to mention any movies. So I was trying to think if there's an election fraud movie, but I can't think of an election fraud one right off the top of my head. And let's see, what was our other topics? Lockdown. Hey, if you could see the attempted documentary of Legal Eagle's life, Dumb and Dumber, but other than that, there's a lot of good TV shows and movies currently showing. But if you want to understand the criminal legal process, watch Billions or The Practice, which was an older show. Boston Legal is good for its satiric commentary. And for the civil process, watch Damages or the movie A Civil Action or the movie The Verdict. And you can see how the system really works and how it really operates. Those are movies I recommend, and TV shows I recommend to lawyers who work for me, who intern for me, clerk for me, they always are thrown off by it, because I'm like, this is where you should start. Because it teaches you a very different sense of how the legal system operates, how the political process operates, how the two intersect in surprising ways, because you need to know that in order to be able to foreshadow and forecast what your strategy is going to be in dealing with your client.
All right, we got election fraud movie Man of the Year with Robin Williams. The Social Dilemma it's a good watch, and I say watch it with your kids, but make sure that when you're watching with your kids, you know that it is the biggest advertisement for a ministry of truth. Because I thought everyone in it was objective. Like they're talking about the inherent risks. All that they're talking about is a fact checker to fact check Facebook. When that punchline got to me, I was sort of skeptical from the beginning, but it is good to appreciate these social conditioning aspects of social media. The fact that you're the product. It had a number of good things to know. Wag the dog. Oh, the one I love, Robert.
Oh,
let's on this. Bulworth.
Yeah, Bulworth is fun. That's Warren Beatty doing his thing. I wrote to him years ago trying to get him to run for president back in the day when I wanted in 2000. He didn't respond, but Pat Buchanan did. He was very nice about it. He said I wrote too well to be a lawyer. So it was a compliment, but it was funny. So but yeah, I think Inherit the Wind is pretty good. Inherit the Wind is sort of loosely based on Jimmy Curley. If you want to understand old political machines, probably one of the best books is the Rascal King, about Jim Curley of Boston, one of the few people to get elected in a law enforcement position while under indictment. The other one was my hometown, Bookie Turner, but there's not a book yet on Bookie. I may do one down the road. Great political historical guy. Every Man a King, book on Huey Long, is good for understanding Southern populism. There's a good book on Big Jim Folsom, all great governor of Alabama, also great populist. He also previews how the establishment would react to Trump, because the way they reacted to past populist was a good preview of that. And how they reacted to Huey Long, Jim Curley, Jim Folsom is a good preview of that. But yeah, all of those are good texts, and from there.
All right. Amazing. Hit the like on the way out. Everyone, thank you very much, as always, for tuning in. Thanks for the support. Sorry if I missed your chats. Thanks for the comments. Thanks for keeping it civil. And Robert, thank you, as always, just amazing. And people are going to, I'm highlighting the ballot section, sugar, first thing tomorrow morning, because people need to know what the actual risks, concerns, and update are. And if it gets people to vote in person to avoid any of the risks, then we've done our community service.
And I would recommend that to both Republicans and Democrats, because if the rules are strictly enforced, there are legitimate ballots that might get thrown out because of the signature problem. So I think everybody should vote in person. That's the best way to do so, unless you literally physically cannot.
All right. And with that, everybody, thank you. Robert Stickman will say our proper goodbyes. Good night, everybody. Enjoy what is left of the weekend, and we'll see you, if not in mid next week,